Chapter 233. The Sutra Pavilion of the two Zen temples contained countless classics. It was made up of 16 floors, but there were still many books that could not be stored. Although it was not a forbidden area, there was no place to burn incense. Pilgrims did not dare to walk around in this sacred land of Buddhism. Therefore, there were very few people in this area. Only a few monks came and went in a hurry, either to borrow books or to return books. Therefore, the group of three was particularly eye-catching today. A woman who looked like a young woman was holding the ear of a young monk who was wearing a special monk robe. The young woman was nagging non-stop. The poor young monk was being held by the ear and scolded. When he saw the monks of the temple, he still had to bow and greet them politely. Among the monks, there was no lack of eminent monks of the Hui generation. They were all in their 60s. When they saw this young monk who often taught them, they would also respectfully put their palms together and salute. However, when the old monks saw this scene, they all looked down, as if they did not see anything. As for the younger monks of the temple, the more timid ones would blush and grin at the young woman and the girl behind the monk. The more courageous ones would stop and follow a few steps, calling her mistress. Most of them would try to worm their way into being friends with the girl of the same age. Unfortunately, the girl ignored them and was annoyed. She glared angrily and said, "Go away, who are you gathering so many bald heads to light up the lanterns for in broad daylight?" The young monks laughed and dispersed, not forgetting to sneak a few glances at the girl. The young woman who had been holding the young monk's ear said angrily, "Nanbei, you're really loyal. If I didn't ask my daughter to do it, how long would it take for you to give up your master? Tell me, why is your master hiding in the Sutra Pavilion? Which vixen at the foot of the mountain did he receive a love letter from this time?" The young monk who had no choice but to tiptoe said with a bitter face, "Mistress, I really didn't. Master is really studying the Buddhist scriptures. In the past few years, whenever the great abbot handed me a letter, I would quickly take the initiative to hand it over to mistress." The young woman laughed and said, "Bullsh *t. When was it not intercepted by something first? You two little brats peeking at it? What's there to see? Isn't it just a roundabout way of expressing admiration, adoration, and yearning? These women don't even know how to be shy. They're actually flirting with a monk." These three were, of course, Miss East-West, the little monk Zun Nanbei, and the famous tigress of the two Zen temples. "Mother, you even married a monk. Mother, you're married to a monk." The young woman was very amiable towards her daughter. She increased the strength she used to twist her daughter's ear. She turned her head and said softly, "Daughter, how can this be the same? If I don't go to hell, who will? It's enough for your father to harm one woman." Stupid North and South hurriedly expressed their loyalty and said, "Mistress is kind and virtuous." The young woman did not loosen her grip after listening to his flattery. Instead, she tightened her grip and snorted, "You're becoming more and more slippery like your master. You've gone down the mountain twice and now you know how to change your mind according to the wind? How could this be? Daughter, be careful in the future." The small monk wanted to cry but had no tears. It was over. He would probably have to eat half a bowl of rice for every meal for the next half a month. Sigh, forget it. I'll just use the copper coins I saved to buy some nice clothes for East-West. When they arrived in front of a sutra building, the young woman finally let go of the small monk. She shouted angrily, not losing to the Buddhist lion's roar, "Li Xiaoxin." The small monk said timidly, "Mistress, master said that monks don't talk about their names, nor do they talk about their longevity." The young woman ignored him and East-West said unhappily, "Shut up." As soon as the young woman finished shouting, a white-robed monk rushed out of the lofty pavilion with a swoosh. He came to the front of the young woman and said with a smile, "Wife, are you tired from walking? Can you give me a massage?" If an outsider was present, they would think that this woman had been rude and unreasonable along the way and would definitely teach the white-robed monk a lesson. However, when she saw her man, she said softly, "I'm not tired. It's just that I haven't seen you for a few days and I miss you a little." The white-robed monk, whose real name was Li Xiaoxin, smiled intoxicatingly and did not speak. Since she was here, there was no zen in the world. The East-West girl shook her head and walked away like an old man. The small monk, Nanbei, followed behind her and asked softly, "Going to play chess?" The young woman, who was thinking about which abbot to ask for fruits to satisfy her cravings, frowned and said, "Aren't you going to teach some old monks with the surname Sure?" The small monk looked at the hot weather and the hair on East-West's temples sticking tightly to her cheeks. He felt a little distressed and said, "There's still 2 hours left. Do you want to find a place to cool off?" East-West said absent-mindedly, "Why hasn't Su Fengnian come to our temple to play?" The small monk smiled brightly, revealing his white teeth. He volunteered, "Why don't I tell Master to let me go down the mountain to find Su Fengnian? Can I show him the way?" East-West did not speak. She just turned to look at this stupid Nanbei. Alas, a few years ago this stupid Nanbei was half a head shorter than her. How did he suddenly grow so much taller? She walked to a cool corridor under the eaves of a sutra pavilion and sat on the railing. She held her chin and said, "Nanbei, you're so stupid. If I'm not by your side in the future, what will you do?" Nanbei had always been scolded as stupid by this family of 3. In fact, he was the one taking care of these 3 lazy guys. However, he was seriously thinking about this problem. His expression was even more serious than when the old monks in the temple asked him about the ambiguity of Buddhist scriptures. He seemed to have finally figured it out and smiled, "It's okay. As long as you're happy. Look at Master and his wife, they're so loving. You'll definitely be like them in the future. Don't worry, East-West, monks don't lie. I'm a man of my words. In the future, I'll definitely give you a box of the best and most expensive rouge. As for the sarira, I can probably afford it." East-West turned around and slapped the small monk's bald head. "Are you really going to burn the sarira after becoming Buddha? Aren't you stupid?" Nanbei smiled foolishly. He was quite stupid. Chapter 234. Inside the carriage, Su Fengnian and Princess Pei's chess game was a bit messy. Princess Pei's chess skills were originally on par with His Royal Highness's, but today, she had easily won 2 games in a row. She couldn't help but raise her head to look at his expressionless face. She wondered if it was because he was afraid of returning home. Was it because of the big sister, Su Jihu, who had stirred up a storm of criticism and even shook the capital university? Princess Jing, and could be considered to be born into a wealthy family. She was used to the internal strife between brothers. There were very few families that were truly harmonious. Princess Pei had only heard rumors about the most famous widow in Gangnam-do. Not long ago, she had been slapped in the face by a woman from the neighboring Jiangxin county. This talented woman had created a saying that Su Jihu was a broken incense burner. The incense burner was porous and was a metaphor for a slut. This saying had never appeared in any books. When the scholars of the 2 counties came back to their senses, they all slapped the table in praise. For a time, the saying of Su Jihu's incense burner in Gangnam-do became more and more popular. This was especially true for the noble ladies and young ladies of Gangnam-do who had always hated Su Jihu. They would talk about the incense burner every 3 sentences, which made them feel indescribably comfortable and satisfied. After Su Fengnian conceded, he didn't propose a rematch this time. Instead, he left the carriage and jumped onto a snow-white famous horse from the western regions. This fine horse was once the king of the wild horses on the border of Beiliang. It was undoubtedly the most outstanding heavy horse in the world. His Royal Highness said to the Lieutenant Yuan Meng, who was slowly riding behind him, "Tell General Ning that we will enter the city together." Yuan Meng's expression changed, and he secretly grinned. Under normal circumstances, the Beiliang battalion would maintain a distance of 1 li. Today, since His Royal Highness wanted to take a stance, he was naturally happy. As the leader of the 100 White Horse loyal followers, although he didn't insult the Beiliang army by fighting to the death in the Battle of the Reed Marshes in Qingzhou, His Royal Highness had shown such bravery. The Phoenix Battalion had only suffered heavy casualties and couldn't help much. It was always suspicious that they were of little help to the overall situation. During this period of time, Yuan Meng had been unhappy and wanted to vent his anger. Wasn't the opportunity now? Yuan Meng turned his horse around and quickly galloped away. He saw Ningame, whose arm had healed and was once again holding his halberd, and said in a deep voice, "General Ning, His Royal Highness has ordered that we enter the city together." Ningame, who was wearing heavy black armor, nodded. He pulled down his helmet and looked extraordinarily stern. He pointed his halberd at Yangchun City and suddenly squeezed the horse's belly. He led the Phoenix Battalion light cavalry to speed up and gallop forward. Dust flew everywhere. All the carriages and pedestrians on the official road heard the sound of the heavy cavalry and moved to the side with pale faces. They let the group of light cavalry pass by. Su Fengnian didn't stop at all in Xiongbao County. He galloped his horse and arrived 2 days earlier than expected at Yangchun City, which was known as the heart of the world. This city's earth veins were most suitable for the growth of peonies. Therefore, Wei Ziyao and Huang Chu-chun were among the top 3 of the dynasty's top 10 peonies. Su Fengnian looked at the city walls that were getting taller and taller as they approached. He didn't say a word. The guards at the city gate and the merchants and commoners who were using the road to enter the city all looked at this white-robed young master. Good heavens, this horse was extraordinary. Was it a heavenly horse? Even the officials of Yangchun City didn't have such a mount, right? The experienced and knowledgeable guards had better eyesight than ordinary people. Just this horse alone was more imposing than those generals. If there was no mistake, this young master should be one of the top aristocratic families in Yangzhou. When they asked for the road pass according to the rules, they had to smile. If this young master was a generous person, it would be even better if he gave them some money as a reward. However, when the guards heard the thundering sound of cavalry and saw a group of unfamiliar riders with unknown banners charging toward them, their expressions immediately became serious. One of them hurriedly went to inform the city gate captain, while the others berated the common people to temporarily stop entering and leaving the city gate. The 6 or 7 city gate guards and other miscellaneous people all dodged to the foot of the city wall on both sides. Only then did they feel compelled by their duties to block the road with their spears, trembling with fear. Among them, a burly man from the Jiangnan Dao had the right to carry a saber. He took 2 steps forward. Under the scorching sun, he swallowed his saliva, moistening his dry throat that had been tossed around by the heavens. Just as he was about to shout, a halberd general among the cavalry, who was dressed very differently from the Yangzhou soldiers, rushed to the city gate. He placed his 80-gene halberd on the captain's shoulder. Without exerting much force, the captain, whose figure could not be considered weak, staggered. This foreign general, who was wearing black armor and riding a black horse, was like a killing god. He coldly said, "Get out of the way." The 2 trembling captains said in a trembling voice, "General, foreign troops entering the city need to show the tiger seal and the official document from the Ministry of War." Originally, there were only less than 10 generals in the Liang dynasty who had made meritorious contributions. Other than the 6 fixed military officer titles of Long Xiang, Piao Qi, and Fu Gua, they were all second class. The rest of the generals who could be called general were even rarer. For example, Su Shao, who had just been stripped of his title as the pillar of the state, and Gu Jiantang, a famous general in the spring and autumn period who had been given the title of pillar of the state. However, outside of Beiliang, as long as one was a military officer above the 7th class, they would be happy to be called general by their subordinates in private. However, in public, it was easy to cause trouble if one openly called a general who did not have an official title. It could be seen that this small soldier from Hutting County was really afraid of this majestic general of unknown origin. Damn, how could he not be afraid? This guy was holding a halberd. The dynasty claimed that there were millions of soldiers who dared to use a halberd. How many people dared to use a halberd? Su Fengnian raised his head and glanced at the 3 words, Yangchun City, written in seal script on the city wall. He pursed his lips and rushed in. Chapter 235. The officer at the gate, who had just drunk half a jug of wine under the shade of a tree in the inner city, hurriedly ran over. Seeing this troublesome situation, his drunkenness completely dissipated. There was no need to think about forcefully stopping them. He only wanted to delay as much time as possible. When the government received the news, there would be no need for him to be stuck in the middle. He was just about to speak when an object flew through the air. It was like a rainbow piercing through the sun. It stabbed into the stone floor in front of him with a loud bang. It was an extremely rare jet-black halberd in the army. If he took one more step forward, this halberd would pierce a large hole in his body. He was so scared that he stood there like a wooden chicken. In the time he was stunned, the young master in white robes on a white horse had already passed through the gate. Then, 2 carriages followed closely behind. The general in black armor rode slowly on his horse. When he passed by the officer, he pulled out his halberd. The light cavalry passed through the gate. More than 100 cold and beautiful standard knives were unsheathed. They shone dazzlingly through the gate. No one dared to move. It was not until the cavalry troop that trespassed the city gate of Yangchun City disappeared that everyone, who did not dare to breathe loudly, finally felt relieved. The common people near the city gate, who had their eyes opened, discussed animatedly, guessing which family's young master in their province would act so domineeringly. Since ancient times, Yangzhou had produced wealthy families. If it wasn't for the unjust war of the spring and autumn period that suppressed the limelight of Yangzhou's Jiangzhou group, the Green Party of Qingzhou, who had achieved success in recent years, would be nothing. In Gangnam-do, there was the Xiangzhou song of the previous dynasty, the Hutting Lu family of the 4th generation of the 3 dukes of the 4th generation, the Boi Yuan family of the 4th generation, and the Gumu Su family of the 4th generation were all first-class families. After the country war led to the tragedy of 9 out of 10 families, these 4 families began to hide their strength and bide their time. However, Yangzhou, which was named after its great state, was far from what Qingzhou could compare to. Last year, there was a governor's son in Qingzhou who wanted to marry a crippled woman from the Yu family as his wife. He was rejected. The Yu family said that the governor's family was a poor family that didn't enter the ranks. If they married, what was the difference between them marrying animals? However, the county governor of Qing province, who had bitterly studied for a smooth career and became a high-ranking official of a region, was only resentful and did not refute this insult. The citizens of Yangchun City counted with their fingers for a long time, but they could not guess who this young master was. They had never heard of such a rude young master among the 4 major families of Gangnam-do. After entering the city, Xu Xiu urged her horse to catch up with His Royal Highness and said carefully, "Your Highness." Senior Li said he was hungry and wanted to eat something at the restaurant in front. Su Fengnian frowned and nodded. "All right. Xu Xiu, ask for the way to the Lu residence later." His Royal Highness and company dismounted and entered the restaurant, while the Phoenix Battalion stopped their horses by the roadside. The waiter of the restaurant was alert, so he quickly ran out of the restaurant to greet this group of distinguished guests. After being brought to the 2nd floor to take a seat, the business here was booming and the place was packed to the brim. He saw that the customers were divided into 2 groups. Those near the windows were craning their necks to look at the elite cavalry in the bustling city, while those further away from the windows were pricking up their ears to listen to the comments of the customers near the windows. Su Fengnian, the elderly god of swords, and the others had just sat down and asked the waiter to prepare some of the restaurant's signature dishes when they heard some whispers. There were 2 granaries in the world. The desolate northern Liang was the horse granary, while the Jiangnan Dao was the granary of the world, where the richest people in the world were the richest. In the last 100 years, the many commanderies of the Jiangnan Dao had produced a large number of scholars. Thus, the air of eloquence and the air of an advisor were extremely strong. In the eyes of the scholars of the Jiangnan Dao, there was nothing that they could not criticize and nothing that they could not comment on. Of the 30,000 students of the Imperial College in the capital, the ones who liked to point out the state the most were mostly from the Jiangnan Dao. Su Fengnian was expressionless as he waited for the dishes to be served. Xu Xiu had already asked for the location of the Lu residence in the lake pavilion. She bowed beside him and reported the details respectfully. Xu Xiu was a naturally beautiful and charming woman. She was the type of seductress that men would think of in bed with just a glance. Especially now that she was bending over, the view in front of her chest was very aggressive, like a pair of inverted bamboo shoots that were about to burst out of her clothes. In addition to Xu Xiu, Su Fengnian also had Yu Yue, who was holding a white cat, and Princess Jing, whose face was covered by a veil but had a graceful figure. Such a feast for the eyes was rare in the world, and it made the diners on the second floor drool. They immediately had a strong desire to show off, as if they had taken an aphrodisiac. The voices on the second floor were much louder, as they only wanted to be remembered by these rare beauties. Not to mention getting intimate with them, just a few glances from them would be enough to make them ecstatic. Gangnam-do, which was full of noble families and nobles, had always advocated talkative and mysterious talks. The scholars and doctors all wore loose robes and wide belts, feather fans and silk headscarves, and wore crane robes. The air was very fragrant, and they did not even look at riding horses. They had to drive ox carts to show their status. Even the page boys had to pick those pale youths with red lips and white teeth. There were only a few young maidservants who were familiar with playing the zither and brewing tea, and they were too embarrassed to go out and greet their friends. The second floor was full of loud conversations, and it was very lively. I heard that in a few days, Baelyang's empty-bellied heir will come to our Hutting County to visit his eldest sister. This pair of siblings, one is ignorant and incompetent, the other is shameless. They really are a good match. If this widow's conduct wasn't improper, how could she have been scolded by Sir Qingjai's wife to be a two-legged incense burner? This saying is really too wonderful for words. That slap in the face was really good. I heard from some people at Baogwa Temple that after this unrestrained widow was slapped, she still laughed. She really is a woman from Baelyang. You should lower your voice a bit. I heard that the empress who wrote the precepts for women wanted to support her niece, but after the one from Baelyang went to the capital, this empress ceased all activity. There's even news that she went to Changchun Palace. Humph, this world really makes me, a scholar, bitterly disappointed. No matter how much that boorish fellow covers the sky with one hand, how can he extend his hand to Gangnam-do? Wouldn't Grand Secretary Zhang chop off his claws? That's true. Grand Secretary Sir is indeed amazing, a role model for all scholars under the heavens. Sir Qingjai is a bit muddle-headed, but he doesn't neglect the greater good. Read that poem about breaking off ties, we should make a toast. These words aren't wrong, we should indeed make a toast. Come, let's drink. One of the people on the second floor suddenly stood up, arriving at the table where the discussion was the most heated. He drew his blade and hacked the table in half, calmly saying, "You want to drink, right? Today, I'll let you drink piss until you're full." Chapter 236. The middle-aged swordsman in green was about to make a move when his expression changed drastically. Without caring about etiquette, he grabbed his master's arm and hurriedly flew backward. They crashed through the wooden wall on the second floor and landed on the street. The young master asked gloomily, "Wang Meng, why are you doing this?" The swordsman replied as if he was facing a great enemy. Someone downstairs used chopsticks as swords and threw them. His sword intent has reached the first-grade realm. After the swordsman led him a few times into the alleyway, the young master elegantly folded his fan and patted the dust off his body. He smiled and said, "Little sunny Spring City, there's such an expert. No wonder that guy with 2 sabers dared to be so impudent. Wang Meng, what grade is the expert downstairs at?" The swordsman's expression turned ugly as he said, "Perhaps higher than the Vajra realm." He already has some hints of the Finger Xian realm. Only then did the young master's expression turn serious. He snorted coldly and walked into the alleyway. After hesitating for a moment, he threw away the precious folding fan carved from ivory that was worth at least 1,000 taels of silver and said, "You dirted my fan. This debt must be properly settled. So what if you have a first-grade expert to rely on? I don't believe you can walk out of Yangzhou alive." Lu residence. Lu Xianlang, the clan brother of the current head of the Lu family, Lu Daolin, was sitting in the study with a gloomy expression. One of the female servants was standing and massaging his shoulders while the other was kneeling and massaging his legs. The weight of the massages was just right. The 2 beautiful female servants were actually a pair of twin lotuses on a stalk. Individually, the 2 sisters were already bright and moving. When they were together, they were even more alluring. Lu Xianlang was a famous talker in Yangzhou. The Lu family had a total of 6 people in their generation. Compared to the other large families of the same rank in Yangzhou, they were not very luxuriant. However, the Lu family could be said to have produced many talents. When the previous emperor toured Jiangnan, he had personally praised them. It was clear that the Lu family was a shining jewel. With one word from the emperor, the Lu family was established as the leader of Yangzhou. The head of the family, Lu Daolin, was now the right chancellor of the capital's imperial college. Lu Xianlang oversaw Yangzhou, where the family's foundation was. Back then, he had a battle of words with the scholars at the White Horse Temple and convinced them. Then, he had a private visit to Jiangnan province with the old Grand Secretary on whether the 6 classics were history. The debate continued until the middle of the night. The debater who had confronted Lu Xianlang had not yet made a name for himself. Looking at it now, it was simply terrifying. Other than Huan Shu, who was now the left chancellor of the Imperial College, there was also the current Grand Secretary Zhang Julu. Lu Xuanlang's loftiness in the past could be seen. Now that he was old, although he could no longer do the open-minded behavior of spreading nudity and drinking wine in seclusion, he was still a half-saint scholar praised by everyone in Gangnam-do. However, what Lu Xianlang hated the most in his life was that he had married that widow. Not only had he caused the death of the son the family had placed high hopes on, he had also brought countless humiliation to the Lu family. In recent times, he had written letters to his brother, who had disregarded all opposition and strived to bring that wanton widow into the family, full of resentment and complaints. However, his brother was stubborn and refused to drive that woman out of the Lu family. Of the 4 major families in Yangzhou, the ranking was now Jiang Xinchuan, Bo Li Yuan, Hu Ting Lu, and Gu Mu Su. Originally, with the Lu family's wealth and power, they were firmly ranked second. However, it was because of this wanton woman, who he had never treated as his daughter-in-law, that the Bo Li Yuan family's reputation overtook. Now, the crown prince of Bailiang was coming to Yangzhou. Lu Xuanlang's resentment was mixed with the bitterness that was difficult to tell to others. How could the wife of the young man from Jiangxin County, Lu Lighting, have the ability to disturb the imperial concubine who wrote the admonition for women in the palace? There was an arrangement that he did not know. His original intention was to endure the pain and remove the black sheep from the family. He could no longer allow her to stir up trouble and ruin the reputation that the Lu family had painstakingly accumulated for dozens of generations. However, he did not expect that before the imperial concubine in the palace could do anything, he received shocking news that the imperial concubine had been banished to the Changchun Palace by His Majesty and was completely banished into the cold palace. Lu Xianlang, who was holding a saint's classic in his hand, slammed the book on the table. The 2 maidservants were so frightened that their hands trembled and they could not help but increase their strength. This caused Lu Xianlang, who was fond of eating stones when he was young, to feel a wave of pain. This great scholar used to take bait before. Today, not only in the summer, even in the winter, he had to eat ice to relieve his qi. Fortunately, compared to the other 3 families who had taken the 5 minerals powder, he was much better off. However, to the scholars of Gangnam-do, this was nothing. Lu Xianlang was in pain from taking the 5 minerals powder. He could grit his teeth and endure the pain. However, the lowly maidservants did not serve him well. They were immediately slapped in the face. A palm print appeared on their smooth cheeks. Only then did Lu Xuanlang's mood improve slightly. He signaled a maidservant to retrieve the book. Holding it in his hand, he coldly said, "Incense burner, what a fitting name." A cold snort came from the door. "If you knew this would happen, why did you do it in the first place?" The 2 maidservants' faces were as white as snow, contrasting with the red palm print. Lu Xianlang waved his hand impatiently. They quickly bowed their heads and left. They did not even dare to call out their honorifics. They just kept their mouths shut and left. This was because that person did not like them to talk. If they spoke, it would dirty her ears. At the door stood an old woman who was no longer in her prime. Her expression was cold and gloomy. She had a face that did not have any good fortune to speak of. She looked gloomy. The old woman said in a strange tone, "When I came here, I met that B*tch. She even paid her respects to me. Lu Xianlang, only you can pick such a virtuous daughter-in-law. What a blessing." Lu Xianlang coldly said, "The eldest brother is the father. What can I do?" The old woman sneered. Her voice was like that of a ghost. What an understatement. "My son was killed because of your lack of understanding of the big picture." Lu Xianlang angrily said, "Quan is still my son." The old woman sneered, "Lu Xianlang, you have a few sons." "I only have Quan Lu Xianlang dejectedly said, "I want to read." The old woman stared at the man who should have helped and respected each other. Her face was distorted. She turned around and said, "Lu Xianlang, don't forget who my father is. Back then, you did not stop that widow from entering our house. This time, if you dare to let that little bastard surnamed Su into our house, I will not let you off." Lu Xianlang waited for her to leave. He tore a Saint's Classic in half and leaned against the chair, panting. The housekeeper hurried over and knocked on the door in a panic. He did not care about the usual etiquette. His lips were pale as he bent down and whispered a shocking news that shocked the whole city. After hearing it, Lu Xuanlang's expression was uncertain. His 10 fingers tightly grasped the chair. This famous scholar of Jiangnan, who had been praised by his late father for being calm in every major event, showed a hint of fear and muttered, "What should I do?" Chapter 237. For no reason, the Lu Manor closed the manor door in broad daylight. The servant girl nicknamed Xiao Er hurried back to the courtyard to tell the young lady this sensitive news. The most famous vixen widow in Gangnam-do was lying on the bed reading a novel about scholars and beauties. However, compared to the first snow, it was unbearable to look at. After hearing Xiao Er's report, she was absent-minded. She thought it would take at least 2 or 3 days for her brother to arrive in Yangchun City. She did not care about the Lu Manor's little tricks. She was not stupid. The family that Lu Lighting of Jiangxin County belonged to was only a second-rate aristocratic family in Yangzhou. How could they enter the eyes of the imperial palace? The marriage alliance between the Hu Pavilion Lu and the other 3 aristocratic families was complicated. It could not be said that they were bound together for good or ill, but it was true that they were bound together for good or ill. Without Lu Xuanlang's tacit approval, how could the imperial concubine from the palace be involved? Perhaps the mastermind behind the scenes was Lu Xianlang, the father-in-law in name. However, she was too lazy to care. No matter how Lu Qinquan died, she would have to take the blame for her husband's death. No matter how harsh and cold her parents-in-law were, she still performed all the etiquette that a daughter-in-law should have. As for often going to famous temples to listen to the debates of famous scholars and being silently criticized, she did not care about it. She liked to see those self-proclaimed distinguished scholars become as excited as if they had been injected with chicken blood when they saw her enter a banquet. Thus, when she was slapped in the face by the wife surnamed Lu at Baogua Temple, she only laughed. God knows who pitted who. After marrying far away to Jiangnan, she could be said to have seen through these scholars. Most of them had their eyes above their heads and relied on the shadow of their ancestors to not make progress. They rested on their past achievements. The officials from Gangnam-do, for example, were completely different from the remonstrants in the north. They liked to pick on trivial matters to make life difficult for the emperor. They were not afraid of being flogged by the court and were not afraid of being publicly humiliated. From time to time, they would make a scene of remonstrating to death. It felt like they were afraid that the emperor would not be angry or annoyed. They scrupulously adhered to orthodoxy and were loyal to the law to the point of being paranoid. It was no wonder that many scholars said that officials from Gangnam-do were the most like officials. However, the Jiangnan Dao had indeed produced a small group of rather formidable characters. They were well versed in politics, and their methods were well practiced. They were able to govern the world and help the people. However, these civil and military officials who held authority in their hands had all left the Jiangnan Dao, like carps leaping over the Dragon Gate, and were never willing to return. They were not keen on talking about the profound, but but no one could deny that it was these important officials who had truly propped up the Jiangnan Dao to flourish. If it was up to her, Lu Daolin, the head of the Lu family, who controlled half of the Imperial College, was one of them. The Minister of Personnel, Yu Lian, and the General of Dragon, Su Gong, were also one of them. As for Lu Xianlang and a large group of so-called famous scholars who were renowned in both the north and south of the Yangtze River, they lacked a lot of perspective. These old fellows only focused on the rise and fall of their clan's status. If they rose, they would be wild with joy. If they fell, it would be as if they had lost their parents. In their eyes, the martial artists who had made great contributions to the dynasty during the Spring and Autumn War were just crude and barbaric generals. When they said that they were a family of generals, they were far more derogatory than praising. In Gangnam-do, they were especially disliked. If she was just an ordinary daughter of a family of generals, her spine would have been broken by the moral gentleman. Fortunately, who was she? She was the eldest daughter of the butcher, Su Shao. The servant girl who loved her the most asked softly with a face full of anticipation, "Miss, when will His Royal Highness arrive at our Yangchun city?" The widow, Su Jihu, used a finger to scratch the little girl's beautiful face and teased, "Pinch your fingers and count. How many times have you asked in the past 2 days? Have you asked 10 times? The little girl blushed and said, "This servant is hoping that His Highness will help Miss vent her anger. Lu Lighting and that shrew are really too hateful." Su Jihu threw the book away and stretched. He smiled and said, "The latest would be the day after tomorrow. The last time my younger brother sent a letter, he had already arrived in Xiongbao County." The servant girl, Qiao Er, who had been bought by the widow for 10 taels of silver, laughed out loud. Her limpid eyes curved into a pair of crescent moons. She cleverly said, "Compared to the second princess, His Highness still prefers Mississippi." Su Jihu hugged the girl's delicate body and rested his chin on her forehead. He laughed heartily and said, "You really know how to talk." Outside the Lu mansion, the second housekeeper, who had just understood what Lu Xianlang meant, gave a look to the gatekeeper, whose status in Hutting County was comparable to that of a 6th-rank official. The gatekeeper hurriedly opened the side door, allowing only one person to enter and exit. The second housekeeper's surname was originally not Lu, but because of his loyalty, the Lu family bestowed him with the surname Lu. Don't underestimate this change of surname. In the era where the well-dressed gentry looked at the children of poor families as if they were dogs, it was already a great honor. The second housekeeper's name was now Lu Dongyang. For more than 10 generations, he had served the Lu family. The head housekeeper had followed the head of the Lu family to the capital. Lu Dongyang held great power in the Hutting County family and had been influenced by the Lu family's simple and upright style. He liked to step on wooden poles and wear crane cloaks with large sleeves in heavy snow. He claimed that in his life, he liked to wear cold clothes, drink cold food, and sleep cold. Therefore, the Hutting County gave him the elegant title of Mr. Forhan. He walked out of the side door alone and saw a group of 45 elite light cavalry escorting the carriage. "You can give me the name card. I'll visit again when I have time." Captain Yuan Meng's face was gloomy, but he couldn't act rashly. His Royal Highness wasn't present, and after all, His Highness's closest daughter, Commandery Princess Chang, was living here. As for the Lu family's status in Gangnam-do and how powerful they were, would he care about these foul things? Probably seeing through the awkward situation of these Baoyang barbarians, the second housekeeper, Lu Dongyang, with the deep foundation of the Linlang Lu family, suddenly woke up from the shock when he first heard about the bloody deeds of these people. He was no longer afraid and sneered in his heart. 50 light cavalry dared to act so boldly in Hutting County. They really didn't know what was good for them. What kind of scholars were those unlucky scholars whose blood spilled on the scene in the restaurant? They were nothing more than low-class people in Hutting County. At most, they were the descendants of the Jianmen or the officialdom. They were thousands of miles away from becoming a scholar. Did they really think that they could be domineering in Hutting County by killing a few low-class people? They had to lower their heads and beg the Lu mansion to bribe them. How could this group of barbarians be qualified to enter the Lu mansion? In the carriage, Princess Jing, and Pei Nanwei had been lifting the curtain and watching from the side. They were sitting on top of the mountain and watching the tigers fight with relish. Chapter 238. After Su Shao, Gu Jiantang, and a few other vassals toppled the 10 great clans of the spring and autumn period, the Liang dynasty vaguely formed 3 major clans. Gangnam-do was one of them. After the Liang dynasty destroyed the 8 kingdoms, it ordered a portion of the clans of the 8 kingdoms to move to the capital and form another group through marriage. There were also some clans who took the initiative to move north in the past 20 years. During the reign of Hongjia, it was the most frequent. There were no less than 300,000 people. Thus, it was called the Gangnam-do northward migration. Most of them chose Gangnam-do, which was rich and far from the capital. This undoubtedly strengthened the strength of the 4 clans of Yangzhou. Under the influence of the current master, Lu Daolin, the number of talents the Lu clan absorbed was second only to the Yu clan. Naturally, the Lu clan had its own pride and confidence. If the guy who dared to stab a general of Qingzhou to death in front of Zhao Heng was here, there would be nothing to see in this undercurrent. Without a doubt, he would lead these brave and fearless white horse soldiers to crush them. But since he went to Jiangxin County, it would be interesting. If the Hutting County government had a powerful general who did not fear the Bailiang army, it would be even more lively and interesting. Thinking of this, Princess Pei finally revealed a long-lost smile. Jiang and I, who was sitting in the same carriage, was dazed. This sister was really beautiful. The old god of swords, Li Chungang, lazily leaned against the carriage door and dozed off. He had made up his mind not to get involved in such family matters. At some point, Yu Yuwei stepped out of the carriage. Holding the white cat, Wu Meinyang, she stood at the bottom of the steps. She looked at the second housekeeper who had pretended to be someone else and said calmly, "Open the middle gate." Lu Dongyang sneered and pointed at the sign. Yu Yuwei turned her head to Yuan Meng sitting on a warhorse and said calmly, "Field Officer Yuan, the Lu clan of Hutting County treated us with respect. Of course, we have to return the favor." Yuan Meng was puzzled. First of all, he was not clear about the relationship between His Highness and this beautiful courtesan. Since she was qualified to accompany His Highness out of Bailiang, she could not be too bad. Only an idiot would treat her as a famous courtesan. Secondly, the way she returned the gift was very particular. Therefore, he looked at the courtesan who had always given people a feeling of weakness and waited for her to continue. If she only told the Phoenix Battalion to turn around and leave, he would definitely look down on her. Unexpectedly, Yu Yuwei sneered and said, "Stab this blind servant to death." Earlier, His Highness said that after killing him, the corpse must be left at the door. Now, it seems that there is no need to waste energy. We are only here to see Princess Chang. When the time comes, if Princess Chang says that it is not suitable without the main door, the Lu Manor can just install it. If Princess Chang doesn't agree, then kill whoever dares to make a move. Yuan Meng laughed heartily and cupped his fists as a sign of respect. Then, he turned his head and said in a deep voice, "Draw your blade and return the gesture." Yu Yuwei hugged the charmingly naive white cat and turned to walk back to the carriage. The red-faced second steward was left behind, so angry that he couldn't speak. When he saw the Bailiang cavalry draw their blades, the fear that had just disappeared once again enveloped his body. Especially when he saw the fierce lieutenant jump up the steps, he was so scared that he immediately turned around and tried to run through the side door to ask for help. However, a person could not outrun a horse, let alone a Bailiang warhorse. When second steward Lu Dongyang stepped through the door, Yuan Meng's blade hacked down. He fell into a pool of blood and crawled forward with difficulty. This scene caused some of the servants in the manor to cry out in shock. Yuan Meng dismounted his horse and gave this Sir Sihan a heavy stab. Then, he grabbed a leg and threw him out of the side door. His Royal Highness had told him before leaving that the corpse should be left at the door. Yuan Meng did not pay any attention to the Lu Manor servants who had scattered like birds and beasts. He stood at the door and gave the order, "Tear down the middle door." Princess Pei was stunned. She looked at Yu Yuwei, whose words and actions had always been as gentle as water, and was somewhat stunned. Jiangxin County, Lu Manor. The Lu Manor was considered a family with good roots in Yangzhou. However, the nobles were also divided into different ranks. Compared to the four great clans, the difference was like heaven and earth. Lu Lighting, nicknamed Mr. Qingzhai, was currently comforting his wife. He was famous in Gangnam-do for his culinary skills. During this period of time, he did not care about the old adage that a gentleman should stay away from the kitchen. Almost every day, he personally cooked for his wife and racked his brains to please her. Lu Lighting was tall and slender. In Gangnam-do, he was like a crane in a flock of chickens. He had an elegant appearance and was born into a noble family. This kind of man was naturally not lacking in romance. A few years ago, when he first met the widow at the White Horse Temple, he was attracted to her. So what if she was a widow? She was the eldest daughter of that butcher and looked so foxy and delicious. It seemed like water could be pinched out with a light pinch. However, although she had a bad reputation and it seemed like anyone would climb into her bed for a night of pleasure, Lu Lighting, who was a womanizer, knew that this beautiful woman had a very cold temperament. This aroused Mr. Qingzhai's infinite desire to win. He tried his best to please her and could not wait to serve her like an empress. A few days ago, she finally relented. When they were admiring the peonies at Baogua Temple, she said that if he dared to divorce his wife, she would consider it. When Lu Lighting thought about it, he broke out in a cold sweat. How could he have been bewitched? He could not see through her cold temperament. This widow was clearly waiting to watch a show. Therefore, after he stirred up a big mess, his wife somehow got involved with a favored concubine in the palace. He could no longer care about his scholarly demeanor and face. He immediately wrote a poem to break off relations and threw it outside the Lu Manor. Fortunately, the widow's reputation had long been ruined. Who would stand on her side? Otherwise, the Lu Manor would not have remained silent and allowed him to splash dirty water. Ha! When Lu Lighting thought of this, he secretly rejoiced. It was a blessing in disguise. If she was not a widow who should be drowned in a pig cage, how could he know that his wife's family had incense burning in the imperial palace in the capital? This was something that could be heard all the way to the heavens. Lu Lighting rubbed his wife's shoulders and carefully asked with a smile, "Wife, why has there been no movement in the palace recently? Why hasn't that concubine sent an edict to Gangnam-do?" Wife Lu put on an indifferent attitude, but in reality, she could only pretend to be mysterious. Not to mention her, at first, even her family didn't know how to make the empress, who wrote the admonition for women, angry. Her father read by the light of a lamp and flipped through the family tree before he vaguely found a very faint relationship. As for why the thunder was loud but the rain was small, suddenly there was no sound. With her family background, how could she know the truth? As for her husband by her side, how could she not know the fishy smell that could not be brought to light? However, since she was married, she could only vent all her anger on that wanton widow. In her opinion, that slap was not wrong at all. This kind of immoral widow who always wanted to seduce men from other families should be paraded through the streets. It was fine for a man to have 3 wives and 4 concubines, but could it be that you, a widow, wanted to have 3,000 male companions? She was afraid that her husband would continue to pester her about the concubine in the palace, so she could only coldly say, "It's late. Go to sleep." Lu Lighting glanced at his wife's appearance and silently lamented in his heart. She really could not be compared to the heavenly beauty widow Su. Under the moonlight, outside the Lu Manor, 50 brave light cavalry ignored the night curfew and forcefully entered the city, heading straight for the manor. The young master in the lead, wearing a white robe and riding a white horse, did not stop his horse. He urged his horse forward and pulled on the reins. The horse's hooves smashed down on the Lu Manor's central gate and stomped on it. After the horse stepped on the central gate, he urged his horse forward into the Lu Manor. Chapter 239. The middle gate of a slightly larger mansion would not be opened often, especially for the Lu family, which had deep roots in the present age. Not every guest would open the middle gate. Not to mention the county chief of Hutting County, even the governor of Yangzhou and other officials of the border might not have the qualification and honor to do so. The door could be said to be the face of a family. The Lu family was full of hidden dragons and crouching tigers. There were hundreds of officials, advisors, and servants. Although they had just sent the housekeeper, Lu Dongyang, to send away the group of people on the street, many people were secretly observing every move here. However, when the Bailiang's light cavalry opened the door, the Lu family did not send out any men of sacrifice. Only a middle-aged Confucian scholar with a pure yang scarf on his head and cloth shoes on his feet walked out. He was dressed simply and shabbily. Behind him was a young servant with a delicate temperament. He held an ancient sword in a black sandalwood scabbard wrapped in the skin of a southern sea shark. Unlike other famous swords, this sword did not have the slightest chill when it was sheathed. The middle-aged man looked at the housekeeper who had died in the courtyard and sighed softly. The door had been opened in an uproar. Lieutenant Yuan Meng and the Confucian scholar in the courtyard looked at each other. The middle-aged man from the Lu family bowed slightly and said indifferently, "Today, the Lu family did not treat guests well. As the housekeeper, Lu Dongyang should be punished, but not to the point of death. A return of gifts needs to be returned." Yuan Meng knew what was good and was on guard. He held the Bailiang knife in his hand tightly. The murderous aura that was nurtured by battle formations was naturally different from the aura of Jianghu people. After the Confucian scholar who was not holding a book but a sword by his side bowed, he faced the drowsy old man in a sheepskin coat in the carriage in the distance. This time, he bowed deeply and said, "I am Lu Baijie from Hutting County. I received the ancient sword Ba Xiu when I was 11 and have been practicing swordsmanship for 36 years. I would like to learn from Senior Li." When the old god of swords heard the two words, Ba Xiu, he slowly opened his eyes and glanced at it. He nodded and said, "It is indeed Yang Yuzhang's sword." This old man was limited by his aptitude and his swordsmanship was mediocre, but his vision was not bad. When this old man fought with others, he would have a headache every time he saw this guy. However, Yang Yuzhang once said that he would not accept any disciples in this lifetime. "How did you obtain the last sword from the Tangxi sword furnace?" Lu Baijie, who introduced herself in front of Li Chungang and performed the etiquette of a junior, smiled and said, "It's probably because I was nicknamed Tangxi when I was young. I met my master by chance and was given the Ba Xiu sword and half of the sword manual. For 36 years, he had not dared to slack off for even a single day. His master held the old senior in high esteem. He said that the two-sleeved green snake could dominate the sword forest for 50 years. Junior has been longing for this for a long time. Today, I have the courage to draw my sword partly because I am forced to do so by my status as a disciple of the Lu family, but mostly because I want to sharpen the inferior swordsmanship that I have cultivated behind closed doors for 36 years. If I lose, I implore Senior not to take your anger out on the Lu family." The old man with the sheepskin fur coat said impatiently, "Your tone is exactly the same as Yang Yuzhang's. Why don't you try? If you only have the craftsmanship of Yang Yuzhang's swordsmanship and not the ingenuity of his swordsmanship, then you are not worthy of this old man taking action. Who the F***ck wants to make things difficult for you aristocratic families? Do you have nothing better to do? Swatting flies with a bamboo pole in a latrine pit, you will be splashed with feces no matter what." This old man did not believe in heresy back then and suffered a great loss at the hands of lame Su. At this point, the old man immediately shut his mouth. Exposing one's shortcomings was not Li Chuangang's usual style. Lu Baijie smiled and stretched out 2 fingers to gently stroke the scabbard. The famed Ba Xiu sword was half unsheathed. At this moment, a familiar sound of footsteps came from behind. The woman called out, "Little uncle." Lu Baijie, the youngest and most leisurely of the Lu clan's glittering jewels 7 jades in the lake pavilion, had a sorrowful expression on his face. His fingers swiped back and the Ba Xiu ancient sword that had appeared in the world immediately returned to its scabbard. Everyone only caught a glimpse of a bright azure edge. Lu Baijie was the youngest son of the previous master of the Lu clan, Lu Xianhua. Compared to the current master's eldest son, Lu Daolin, he was a full 20 years younger. Lu Baijie was born of a concubine. He was naturally intelligent, but he was indifferent to fame and fortune. He was not passionate about the 3 immortals of Confucianism and was obsessed with the way of the sword. Until now, he had not married, so naturally he did not have any children. He rarely showed his face in the Lu clan. Among the influential members of the Lu clan, Lu Baijie was the only one who was truly close to the widow. He, who did not have any children, largely regarded Su Jihu as half a daughter. If he had not secretly stifled the signs of many disasters, the Lu clan would have long been in chaos. Not to mention others, the woman whose father was the master of the Su clan had done too many dirty deeds. But he was apprehensive about her identity as his sister-in-law and felt the pain of losing a child. Otherwise, Lu Baijie would not have allowed such a scandal to happen in the Lu clan. After such a big event as the removal of the center gate, which was enough to shock Yangzhou, Su Jihu, no matter how much he was restrained in the Lu clan, still received the news immediately. Only then did he confirm that his younger brother had arrived in Yangchun City. Other than him, who else could have done such a shocking thing? How could Su Jihu bear to blame him? However, the Lu clan was still her home in name. It would not be good to make things too tense, especially when her father-in-law, Lu Xianlang, was willing to do anything for the sake of his reputation. Which famous person would not cherish their reputation? She giggled at Lu Baijie and called out, "Little uncle," in a coquettish manner. In return, she received a helpless expression. Su Jihu did not exchange pleasantries with the few elders in the Lu clan who were easy to talk to. She ran out of the main door. All the valiant light cavalry dismounted and knelt on one knee, respectfully saying, "Beiliang's Phoenix Battalion pays respect to Princess Chang." Su Jihu ignored them. Looking left and right, she did not see her younger brother's gentle smiling face that she had always dreamed of. She was immediately disappointed. The maidservant, Blue Bird, could already walk with difficulty, but her complexion was still unsightly. Just as she was about to kneel, Su Jihu, who revealed a frightened expression but quickly concealed it, stepped forward to support her. Biting her lips, she asked in a low voice, "Where is Fengnian?" Blue Bird replied softly, "His Highness went to Jiangxin County. He said he would rush back to Yangchun City overnight." Su Jihu stamped her foot. Her eyes were red as she muttered, "That idiot." She took a deep breath and said rather majestically, "Follow me into the Lu clan residence." If Lu Baijie, who was of the same generation as Lu Daolin and Lu Xianlang, did not stop her, who would dare to? Lu Baijie's illustrious identity as the son of a powerful family was there, but his other identity was even more intimidating. There was a special sword review that listed Lu Baijie of Hutting County in Yangzhou. The review said that Lu Tongxi's swordsmanship was upright and vast. Although the name of the sword contained the word tyrannical, it was fully deserving of being called the sword of the king. The Lu clan residence's courtyard was deep and was a typical Jiangnan garden style. The size of the courtyard was not as large as the other three clan residences. However, the Sincerity Garden, which had hosted 6 emperors, was the most famous. The lake and rockery in the garden were created by the chief stone-folding master. One mountain, one peak, exuding vitality. Every stone, every seam, was properly accounted for. It was praised by the late emperor as being unique in Jiangnan. It should be known that the gardens in Jiangnan were the best in the world. One could see the ingenuity of the Sincerity Garden. Su Jihu personally led the way. Along the way, he briefly and comprehensively explained the essence of the garden structure to Yu Yue. Lu Baijie and the sword attendant were at the back. Coincidentally, Li Chungang, Jiang and and Princess Jing'an were at the back. Lu Baijie, who had not used her sword today, asked the old god of swords about some doubts in the art of swordsmanship. The old man had some good karma with half of the younger generation, Yang Yuzhang, so he did not put on airs. Although Lu Baijie's character was a typical aristocratic family, in the end, she was like the sword. She was not old-fashioned and constrained. Lu Baijie only glanced at Princess Pei from the corner of her eyes and did not look at her again. Chapter 240. Su Jihu lived in the freehand garden in the northwest corner. The yard was not small, but there were pitifully few servant girls. It was slightly cold. The Phoenix Battalion, including Yuan Meng, were arranged to live in 2 yards not far from each other. At the gate of the yard, Lu Baijie bowed again before leaving. Entering the yard, Su Jihu had his personal servant girl Xiao Er bring some iced plum soup. After sitting down, he asked, "What happened on the road?" Bluebird truthfully reported everything that had happened at the reed marsh. Bluebird spoke calmly and tirelessly. The danger involved could not be described as simple twists and turns. Su Jihu's expression rose and fell. In the end, when he heard that His Royal Highness was safe and sound, he covered his chest and sighed heavily in relief. Su Jihu turned his head with a strange gaze to Pei Nanwei, who still had not been able to sit down. This unruly younger brother was really something. He even dared to steal a Wang Fei. From afternoon to dusk, the freehand garden was calm. Su Jihu asked the girls about Su Fengnian and especially liked to hear some embarrassing stories. Su Jihu did not have the good mood to be treated coldly by the Lu manner that was within reason. After a sumptuous dinner, a well-educated page came and lightly knocked on the door. He came from the smallest retreat garden in the Lu manor. Lu Baijia, who was regarded as a sword immortal by the people of Yangzhou, did not live there much. For most of the year, she took this page to travel and visit hermits. The one who opened the door was the servant girl Xiao Er. For some reason, the two of them did not see eye to eye. At this moment, it seemed that enemies would not meet unless they were enemies. Seeing Xiao Er, the page said coldly and stiffly, "My master wants to see your mistress." The atmosphere was already strange. After these words were said, it became even more awkward. Xiao Er huffed coldly and left after saying that she understood. Looking at her back with clear eyes, the page secretly revealed a thread of annoyance. Sitting in the pavilion by the lake, Lu Baijia smiled slightly and muttered to herself, "The youth already knows the taste of worry." Su Jihu walked out of the garden and sat down in the pavilion. He said guiltily, "I've troubled you this time." Sword immortal Lu, who didn't have any of the bad habits of a noble family but still had the backbone of a noble family's descendant, shook his head and said, "It's not that I'm causing trouble for little uncle, but if I do that, it will be even more difficult for you to conduct yourself in the Lu estate." Su Jihu said indifferently, "This is nothing. It's nothing more than a fake smile in front of me and a colder smile behind me." Lu Baijia sighed and said, "Let's not talk about second steward Lu Dongyang first. His Highness the Crown Prince ordered his retainers to commit murder in the downtown area. No matter how bad their conduct was, they were still scholars from Hutting County. One of them was even a descendant of a servant. If the Crown Prince didn't dismiss him, little uncle could still go to elder brother and say a few words. Lu Manor would come forward to clean up this mess. At most, we'll just give some compensation to the families of the lesser concubines, as well as a few officials' salary. Anyone would have complaints about using money to buy their lives, but a proper official's position should be enough to shut their mouths. For such a troublesome matter, little uncle doesn't mind making an exception for you. But to tear down the central gate of the Lu estate and kill Lu Dongyang in front of the entire street of Hutting family, second brother cares about his face and not adding insult to injury is already the limit of his patience. The Lu family has experienced ups and downs for hundreds of years and has suffered a lot of humiliation. It's just that in the past 100 years, the bumpy days have gradually lessened. Today, we've been humiliated to this extent. I'm afraid even the master will be angry." Su Jihu was silent. Lu Baijia frowned and said, "Jihu, at this time and place, there are only the two of us. Little uncle will speak frankly. As His Royal Highness' younger brother, how can you act without any regard for the consequences? Do you really not care about the opinions of those in the capital at all? You must know that no matter how powerful your father is, in the end, he still set up political opponents like Zhang Julu and Gu Jiantang, who are pillars of the dynasty. Moreover, he wants to push the 4 clans of Yangzhou to the enemy's side of Bailiang. Because of you, Su Shufei was demoted to the Cold Palace. If it was His Majesty's idea, it would be fine. If it was His Majesty's idea, do you think the Su family will still have any friendship left in His Majesty's heart? Moreover, don't you know who Su Shufei is? These years, the Gumu Su family has spent almost all of their manpower and resources to pave the way for her. Now that they've suffered such a calamity, even if the Gumu Su family, who used to have a close relationship with the Lu family, will not be able to advance and retreat together like before. It's exactly the same as Quan, or sudden death. You'll have to take the blame. Su Jihu raised his head and smiled. I'm used to it. Lu Baijie said bitterly, oh, you. Su Jihu leaned against the red pillar and looked into the distance. He said softly, that younger brother of mine went to Jiangxin County to find trouble with that Lu lighting. Lu Baijie said in a low voice, is he still going to cause trouble? Is he not afraid of being unable to clean up the mess? If someone with ulterior motives fanned the flames, then it would not be just people fishing for fame that would jump out. Even the entire Jiangnan Dao would be in an uproar. After all these years, have you not seen through the so-called famous people of Jiangnan Dao who value fame more than life? I know, I've seen through it a long time ago. Qingzhou values benefits. Yangzhou values fame. Which Gangnam-do scholar doesn't admire my father-in-law's words, even death is more important than Mount Tai? Su Jihu squinted his eyes and smiled. But this younger brother of mine, probably because my father is the king of Bailiang, he doesn't care about the things that many people would risk their lives to hold in their hands. However, he cares about the things that even poor people don't care about the most. Little uncle, if you tell him these very reasonable advice, he probably won't listen to it. Lu Baijie, who had the reputation of Tangxi Sword Fairy, sighed. If you stop him from entering the Lu residence, your future days will be easier. But if you really go and stop him, not to mention whether you can stop him or not, you'll be the first to fall out with me. Su Jihu laughed without caring about etiquette. Uncle, you're so pitiful as a sword fairy. Lu Baijie looked at his daughter's smiling face with some sadness in his eyes. Back then, the woman he admired also had such a natural smile. If he had been more resolute and talked less about morality and the overall situation, perhaps he wouldn't have had any regrets. How could there be so many ifs in the world? Lu Baijie closed his eyes. Not far away, the page boy and the servant girl were arguing. Would these two children also understand the unusualness of thinking it was normal at the time, many years later? After Lu Baijie left, Su Jihu sat in the pavilion and waited until late at night. When His Royal Highness appeared outside the Lu residence, the white horse was dragging a cold corpse that had long been badly mutilated. Obviously, it had been dragged all the way from Jiangxin County to Hutting County. Although Lu Baijie, who was guarding the door, had expected this, he still felt extremely shocked when he saw this scene. After Su Fengnian dismounted, he raised his head to look at Lu Baijie. Because of his elder sister, Su Jihu, he didn't have any ill feelings toward this Tangxi sword fairy. He only saw Lu Baijie put one hand on the hilt of her sword and supported it with a Bashio ancient sword. Su Fengnian said expressionlessly, is Mr. Tangxi trying to sell me some benevolence and righteousness? Lu Baijie snorted coldly and turned to leave. In addition to shock, he was also puzzled. How did the Crown Prince of Bailiang get so seriously injured? Su Jihu ran all the way, leaving the servant girl Xiao Er far behind. She rushed out of the Lu residence's gate and stopped very close. She smiled and said, "Ah, we've caused trouble again." She didn't notice that Su Fengnian's back was dripping with blood. When the horse dragged the corpse through the city gate, the assassin, like a gecko, stuck to the ceiling of the cave, waiting for an opportunity, struck and almost shattered his spine. But Su Fengnian just stared at her with red eyes and said softly, "Sister, let's go home, okay?" Chapter 241. In the Free Will Garden, Su Jihu's private room was filled with the stench of blood. Even the 3 purple smoke sandalwood furnaces that had been added with high-grade ambergris biscuits could not conceal the smell. Su Jihu's face was pale as he looked at Li Chungang, who was taking Su Fengnian's pulse. His Royal Highness's upper body was naked as he lay on the bed. His spine was badly mangled. The old god of swords had a look of pity on his face. Su Jihu, who was not afraid of anything, was so scared that tears fell down his cheeks. He covered his mouth with both hands, not daring to cry out loud. Su Fengnian, who had just taken a stroll through the gates of hell, did not look like a dying person. Li Chungang nodded and said, "He won't die." What a pity. If the hand knife had been an inch deeper, even De Luo Jin Xian would not have been able to save him. Now, it's just a superficial wound. Is it the young lady who killed Wang Mingyin? Su Fengnian's face was gloomy as he grunted. He brought his halberd, Ningame, Wei Shuyang, and 50 light cavalry to Jiangxin County. From the beginning, he had agreed with the 2 retainers to lure the snake out of its hole. However, he did not expect that the lady who raised the big cat was so patient. On the way from Yangchun City to Jiangxin County and back, His Royal Highness had deliberately revealed so many flaws, but she did not take advantage of them. After entering the city gate, Su Fengnian had just breathed a sigh of relief when the assassin, who had been sticking to the dark wall like a gecko, gently dropped down. Fortunately, she did not seem to have expected that His Royal Highness was already on the 4th floor of the Great Yellow Courtyard. If it had been Su Fengnian in the reeds, his spine would have been shattered by her stab. However, after several failed assassinations, the embarrassed and angry girl immediately gave chase. Su Fengnian stepped on the side wall with the tip of his foot, and she followed closely behind. Just as she was about to deliver a second stab, Ningame's halberd had already been thrown out. Wei Shuyang's figure also swept away like a hawk, and the white horses all brought out their crossbows. Seeing that the situation was not good, she did not continue to fight. She slipped out of the inner gate, and her slender fingers dug into the wall like tofu. After a few leaps, she disappeared in an instant. When they were passing through the Xiongbao County, the horses were drinking water by the stream. She, who had been waiting for a long time, also made a move once. She rushed out from the bottom of the stream, but at that time, Li Chungang was not far away. In an instant, Sword Chi rushed over and did not give her a chance to get close. Everyone only saw this girl hiding in the water, disappearing like a fish. The dense rain of crossbows and short halberds were unable to hurt her in the slightest. She really was a bone cancer. Su Fengnian comforted her, "Sister, it's really all right." Su Jihu, who had put down the huge stone in her heart, wiped her tears and smiled. "Pa." She fiercely slapped him on the butt. "It's all right, it's all right. With your conduct, how can I sleep in the same bed as you and whisper to each other at night?" Li Chuangang's expression was strange. He originally wanted to tease her, but after thinking about it, he gave up. With Su Fengnian's narrow-mindedness, he would not dare to be angry with him. Perhaps he would vent his anger on Jiang Ni's head. Damn, everything has its vanquisher. This old man also had a day like this. There was no justice in the world. He reluctantly got up and left the fragrant boudoir. In the room, Blue Bird and the servant girl Xiao Er also tactfully left. Only this pair of siblings who had been close since childhood remained. Although it was an external injury, the flesh was torn open and it was not good. Su Fengnian was just about to take a break when he felt that something was wrong. He was both helpless and resentful. "Sister, why did you take off my pants? There's no injury there." Su Jihu did not have the perception and arrogance of an older sister. She sweetly said, "Fengnian, I'm not at ease. It's better to take a look. There are no outsiders here. Why are you blushing?" Su Fengnian reached out to protect his belt. He turned his head and angrily said, "Sister. How old are you already? Don't be so shameless, okay?" Su Jihu pretended to have a face full of hidden bitterness. If it was someone with a shallow cultivation, like those famous scholars in Gangnam-do, they would have lost their souls. But Su Fengnian had been with this older sister for many years. How could he not know her tricks? He didn't dare to loosen his grip at all, fearing that she would succeed. The siblings were in a stalemate. Su Fengnian begged for mercy. "Sister, I'm begging you, okay? No one takes advantage of the situation and torments the injured like you." Su Jihu resentfully withdrew her hand. But she did not forget to slap His Royal Highness's butt again. She chuckled and said, "Oh, very perky. It's good to practice the blade. This physique is very good. When your injury is healed, the fertile water should not be left to outsiders. You have to let me have some fun." Su Fengnian had a headache and said, "If you continue like this, I'll go to my second sister's place tomorrow." Su Jihu leaned over, her charming face close to His Royal Highness. Her breath smelled like orchids. She snorted and said, "You heartless fellow. Tell me, who in the family doted on you the most? Who wet the bed when you were young? And who secretly washed your quilt? Now you're turning your back on me?" Su Fengnian turned his head to look at this dignified and virtuous face. It was difficult for outsiders to see it. He said softly, "Sister, why don't you come home with me?" Su Jihu squatted at the head of the bed. She rested her chin on her hand and stared at her younger brother who had just entered Yangchun and started a massacre. She said gently, "This is sister's home. A married daughter is like spilled water. Why else would there be the saying, spilled water can't be recovered? Even if sister goes back to Bailiang, it's only to visit family, not to go home." Su Fengnian didn't say anything. Su Jihu reached out and stroked this fellow who didn't hesitate to make enemies in Gangnam-do for her. After looking at him for so many years, she still couldn't get tired of looking at him. She said softly, "My youngest uncle, that Tangxi sword immortal Lu Baijie, said that you're going against the tide and won't amount to anything. This is because he doesn't know how much Fengnian likes sister. Of course, sister knows how much your heart aches. You killed those boring scholars in the city and went to Jiangxin County to drag Lu Lighting to death to Hutting County. Other than wanting to avenge sister, you also want to force sister out of Gangnam-do so that I can go back to Bailiang with you. Am I right? You fool, I'm still your sister no matter where I am. If I really go back to Bailiang, will I be happy? In the future, when your second sister goes back from Shangyin Academy, she'll be jealous of you every day. I can't win against her when it comes to reasoning, so I don't want to suffer this. This time, you came to see sister first. She's not happy even when you call her second sister. She'll be furious." Su Fengnian snorted in a fit of pique. Su Jihu reached out and pinched this increasingly angular face. She said with a smile, "You're becoming more and more attractive, but you're still a child." Su Fengnian was just about to speak when Su Jihu waved her hand and said, "Go to sleep. Don't chase sister away. I'll take a good look at you." Su Fengnian fell into a deep sleep. Chapter 242. When His Royal Highness woke up in the morning the next day, he found that his eldest sister had fallen asleep at the head of the bed. He got up with a wry smile. The wound on his back had already scabbed over, and the speed of his recovery was astonishing. Although there was still a long way to go before he reached the Vajra realm, he already had a huge advantage over the body of an ordinary martial artist. The sound of Su Fengnian waking up did not wake Su Jihu up, but it startled the servant girls sleeping next door, Chiao Er Chiao. Most of the servant girls who did their jobs were not deeply asleep. She casually put on a coat and trotted in. It was a hot summer day, so she was dressed lightly. Her growing figure was graceful, and she had the unique moist spirit of a Jiangnan woman. Her body was light and pure. Otherwise, the capital's officials and dignitaries would not have raised thin horses in their households. The thin horses trained by the Gangnam-do and the West Chu concubines were known as the Two Beauties. Su Fengnian raised his finger and shushed her, indicating for the budding young girl to be quiet. She glanced at His Royal Highness's naked upper body, and her small face flushed red. She quickly lowered her head, afraid that she would overstep the rules. The higher the status of a powerful family, the stricter the rules and regulations. The masters also had different personalities, so the servants naturally did not dare to be arrogant and overstep the boundaries. Moreover, the servant girl Chiao Er Chiao had heard too much about the arrogant behavior of Bailiang's heir apparent from the Mrs. Mouth. In addition to yesterday's disturbance, she did not dare to be careless. The little girl originally thought that His Royal Highness would at most go to Jiangxin County to beat up that henpecked Master Qingzhai after seeing the Mississippi. She would never have thought that His Royal Highness would use a horse to drag Lu Lighting's corpse from Jiangxin County to the Lu residence. Su Fengnian picked up a mutton-fat jade bottle at the head of the bed, lowered his voice, and chuckled, "Chiao Er, help me apply the ointment. I can't reach my back." The little girl trembled as she took the jade bottle. She poured out the fragrant ointment onto her fingertips and sat on the edge of the bed. Her face, ears, and neck were red as she gently applied the ointment onto His Royal Highness's back. When her fingertips touched the skin, her delicate body trembled. The girl's sparkling and translucent skin was almost dripping with water. However, when she saw that in addition to the new injuries on His Royal Highness's back, there were also some old scars, she only felt shocked. She didn't dare to imagine why His Royal Highness, who had such a prestigious family background, would be covered in scars. The little maid Xiao Er lived in the courtyard of the Lu residence, which was as deep as the Marquis's palace. She was especially fortunate to be under Su Jihu's protection. How could she understand the sinister ups and downs of the Jianghu? To her, if the miss ate less rice or caught a cold from heatstroke, it would be a big deal. It was like being slapped in the face by a fierce woman. She would risk her life to avenge the miss and repay the kindness. Generally speaking, Xiao Er was lucky to be able to meet such a widowed master like Su Jihu. She didn't need to worry about being molested by her master's men. In the aristocratic families, how many maids as delicious and seductive as her could maintain their virginity? They would have long been secretly eaten or openly eaten until not even their bones were left. The private affairs of the boudoir were something that even the moral model sages and scholars couldn't say anything about. With her help, Su Fengnian put on a new set of clothes and quietly got off the bed. He smiled and said, "Xiao Er, I'm going out to get some fresh air. You just wait for my sister and let her wake up naturally." Xiao Er timidly and shyly agreed. Only now did she secretly notice that His Royal Highness was tall and slender. He was much taller than the Gangnam-do men. Su Fengnian walked out of the room. Blue Bird was standing in the courtyard. Master and servant left the freehand garden and strolled along the lake. Su Fengnian saw that the Tangxi sword fairy Lu Baijie was already sitting in the pavilion. He didn't know if she was waiting for him. Su Fengnian walked over without hesitation. Lu Baijie was the youngest of the 7 glittering jewels of the Lu family. Because he had never married and had children, he did not leave the family and lived in Retreat Garden. Because the head of the family, Lu Daolin, held the position of the Right Chancellor of the Imperial College in the capital, all the affairs in the Lu residence were usually handled by Lu Xianlang. Tangxi Sword Immortal usually did not care about worldly affairs, but the more he was like this, the more his words carried weight on important matters. Even Lu Daolin and Lu Xianlang, who held the power of the Lu family, had to pay attention to the opinions of this concubine-born brother. Among the 7 heroes of the Lu family, apart from these 3, one of them had devoted himself to cultivating Taoism and one of them had entered Buddhism, while the other 2 were officials in Yangzhou. They were both primary grade 4 officials. Being a local primary grade 4 official was already a true high-ranking official. They were far more popular than being a primary grade 4 official or even a secondary grade 3 official in the capital. Although the officials in the capital had always looked down on the officials from other places, the ones who truly wanted to enter the cabinet were mostly secondary grade 4 officials. It would take at most 6 years and at least 3 years to accumulate enough experience and popularity before returning to the capital. Only then could they be considered as the true pillars of the dynasty. Originally, with Lu Baijie's talent, he could have become the backbone of the Lu family, second only to the head of the family, Lu Daolin. However, the head of the family was still his elder brother, Lu Daolin, so Lu Xianlang could only complain. After entering the pavilion, Su Fengnian gave a junior salute and said respectfully, "Fengnian pays his respects to Mr. Tang Shi. Last night, I mistakenly thought that Mr. Tang Shi wanted to stop me from entering the mansion. In a moment of desperation, I spoke disrespectfully. I hope Mr. Tang Shi won't blame me." Lu Baijie said coldly, "His Royal Highness is too serious. However, I don't have much moral benevolence to sell. Why did your Highness enter the pavilion?" Su Fengnian said with a smile, "Big sister has been saying that Mr. Tang Shi is good all these years. Today, I came to ask for a beating from Mr. Tang Shi. Coincidentally, I was a little injured. I thought that Mr. Tang Shi would be gentler." Lu Baijie was obviously stunned for a moment. She said with a smile, "Your Highness's scoundrel temper is exactly the same as your sister's." Su Fengnian said, "Both of us learned from Su Shao." This was the first time Lu Baijie heard the 2 words, Su Shao, from someone's mouth. In Gangnam-do, no matter how famous people talked, they would at most refer to the barbarian son of Baelyang. There were very few who dared to call him Lame Su. At most, they would only do so in private situations, not to mention calling out Su Zhao's name directly. Lu Baijie smiled and said, "How long does your highness want to stay? Do you plan to kill a few more Gangnam-do scholars?" Sword will overflowed in the pavilion. Bluebird frowned and was about to step into the pavilion when Su Fengnian waved his hand and stopped the daughter of Spear Immortal Wang Xiu. He faced Sword Immortal Tang Shi and said calmly, "It's fine as long as they don't provoke me. I'm not a devil who has nothing better to do than to kill people. It's more like having a full stomach thinking about sex." Lu Baijie smiled coldly and said, "Is your highness not afraid of causing trouble for the king of Baelyang who is still in the capital?" Su Fengnian shook his head and smiled. "Mr. Tang Shi, you don't know. If I came to Gangnam-do calmly and then left Gangnam-do calmly and let those scholars talk about my elder sister, Su Xiao would really be angry. Whether it's killing Lu Lighting or scholars, the memorials from Jiangnan are flying to the capital like snowflakes. Su Xiao has a headache, but he's actually very happy. When he returns to Baelyang in the future, he might secretly scold me for killing so few." Lu Baijie sighed helplessly and said, "Your highness, your family." However, there was clearly more sincerity in Sword Immortal Tang Shi's faint smile. Su Fengnian looked at the lake and said, "My elder sister still refuses to return to Baelyang. She says this is her home. What's so good about this home? Mr. Tang Shi, please teach me." Unexpectedly, Lu Baijie laughed for no reason and said, "It's not good at all. It's a pity that I don't have the final say in this home. Otherwise, I would have told your sister to scram back to Baelyang long ago. Hurry up and scram. Out of sight, out of mind. Otherwise, I won't be able to enjoy myself when I go out to play." Su Fengnian immediately had a good impression of this Sword Immortal of Yangzhou. He grinned and had a bit of the feeling of a naughty junior interacting with an enlightened senior. Chapter 243. Most of them were acquaintances from Huting County. When they saw the widow Su Jihu get off the carriage, they immediately shut their mouths. Compared to their previous attitude of watching a show, after yesterday's incident, the other counties in Huting County were still fine. However, all the well-informed aristocratic families in Yangchun County had long been shocked speechless by the methods of His Highness the Crown Prince. After killing the scholars on the street, he rampaged through the soldiers in the city that were several times more numerous. It was said that he even dismantled the middle gate of Lu Manor. That night, he dragged Mr. Qingzhai's corpse into the city and threw it at the gate. What kind of behavior was this? How could this be described as tragic? The elders of the aristocratic families in the city got up in the middle of the night and talked with their old friends under the light. They all lamented that this was the greatest humiliation in Yangzhou in 100 years. It was said that Lang Jiang Donggong Huang, who was the most ruthless in dealing with the aristocratic families, had received orders to bring 600 elites from the provincial capital to Yangchun today. Who didn't know that Lang Jiang, who killed Gu Musu's third son as soon as he took office, had a deep relationship with the Yu family? Furthermore, he was General Gu Jintang's trusted aide in the past. The gate of the temple was tightly shut. After Su Fengnian got off the carriage, he saw that there was a small and exquisite square pond in front of the temple. Beside the spring, there were green trees hugging each other, and there was also a strange old pine. Su Jihu intimately held his arm and walked over. There were stone dragon heads on each side of the pond. Spring water dripped from the dragon mouths. The water was clear, and the scattered copper coins at the bottom of the pond could be seen clearly. Su Jihu picked up a dead branch and crouched down to stir the spring water. When she stopped stirring, a line as thin as a silver thread would appear on the surface of the water. She raised her head and smiled. "Do you see? It's said that this is the scene caused by the mixing of mountain water and spring water. Interesting, isn't it?" Su Fengnian crouched down and wanted to reach into the water to pick up a few copper coins. Su Jihu smacked him with the branch and scolded him jokingly, "Have you gone crazy from being so poor?" Su Fengnian still picked up a copper coin and pinched it between two fingers. He chuckled. I'll save as much as I can. He stood up. The air outside the temple was fresh and the birds were chirping. He raised his head and saw that the greenery in the temple was higher and higher. He withdrew his gaze. The old pine tree beside him was indeed not vulgar. Its thick trunk twisted left and right, twisting like a crouching dragon. He didn't know if it was the will of the heavens or man. The old god of swords and Jiang and I were standing under the tree. The old man with the sheep fur coat sighed. The will of the heavens are too sentient, but if it was done by man, it would be too heartless. But I've never actually seen anyone actually do it, but I've never seen anyone actually do it, but I've said. I've, but I, Su Fengnian smiled and said, shall I try? Su Jihu glared at him. You dare. When Dum Xiao saw this, she smiled gently. His Highness the Crown Prince and the young miss really loved each other. Perhaps because he was caught laughing, Su Fengnian made a face at the little girl. The servant girl was so frightened that she quickly hid behind Su Jihu. The little girl's heart was beating like a deer. She didn't seem to be afraid. Instead, she seemed to have been gently scratched by something and couldn't calm down. Su Jihu turned his head to look at the little girl who was in a daze. He smiled knowingly. How could there be a girl in the world who didn't like her younger brother? But on the surface, Su Jihu still rolled his eyes charmingly at Su Fengnian. He waved the branch as if warning him not to fool around in a Buddhist holy land. The door of the temple slowly opened. The two little monks joined their hands and bowed. It was just that today, the side room was the place where pilgrims and vegetarian meals were provided. After Su Jihu and his entourage took their seats, no one else dared to enter. At Su Fengnian's table, Su Jihu was sitting. In addition to the 9 bushels of Daoist mi and Daoist wei shuyang, there was also an empty stool. The maidservant heir Qiao and the military general Ningame were both standing. Princess consort Jean Gan knew her place, and in addition to the fact that she had been terribly bullied on the way here, she was even more unwilling to sit down. Su Jihu was a person who liked crowds. He asked Jiang and I, who was sitting at the next table, to call her over. The little mud girl hesitated for a moment, but didn't refuse. When she approached, Su Jihu pulled her over to sit beside him. He smiled and said, Jiang and I, you're really getting prettier as you grow up. You were already pretty when you were young. Back then, you were the only one who could compare with Fengnian. At first, I was worried that a girl would change 18 times between childhood and womanhood. I was afraid that you wouldn't be pretty when you grew up, but now it seems that I was worried for nothing. Come, tell sister whether Fengnian bullied you or not. The little mud girl was quite a shrewish girl in front of His Royal Highness and the old god of swords. At this moment, her face was red and she didn't say anything. Su Fengnian laughed and said, your face is red. It's rare. Jiang and I didn't glare at him angrily, but she lifted her foot and stomped on him. His Royal Highness lifted his foot and laughed, I'll hide. You want to fight with me? With Su Jihu present, Jiang and I didn't make any verbal moves. Su Jihu laughed softly, it seems like you're often bullied. Don't worry, I'll help you take care of him later. The little mud girl lowered her head and didn't say anything. Su Fengnian muttered, is it my sister or her sister? Su Jihu raised his hand and pretended to hit her, but His Royal Highness leaned to the side. She lovingly stroked Jiang Ni's slender shoulders. Jiang and I heard that after leaving Baoyang, you've been reading for this scoundrel? This is a good thing. During this period of time, if you come to read Wang Dongxiang's The First Snow, to your sister, the price will be doubled. It will all come from that guy's pocket. He won't dare to not pay. Jiang and I raised her head and grunted heavily. It was the first time she smiled this month. Su Fengnian ruined the mood and teased, dimples, 2 little dimples. I saw it. Fine, double the price is double. It's worth it. Jiang and I immediately put on a straight face. but there was still a smile in her eyes. Naturally, it was all because of Su Jihu. It had nothing to do with that scoundrel. Su Jihu laughed. Our little Jiang and I looks the best when she smiles. No girl in the world can compare to her. That's why you have to smile more, you won't age easily. An old man wearing a sheepskin coat sitting at the next table with his legs crossed laughed. Little Su, your sister didn't give birth to this body for nothing. Her heart is much better than yours. Su Jihu hugged the little mud girl, turned his head and smiled charmingly. Just because of Sword God Li's words, I'll give you 10 jars of good wine. The old sword god gave a thumbs up and praised, heroic. This old man will definitely drink this wine. If anyone dares to make things difficult for you in Gangnam-do these days, this old man will be the first to go against them. Su Fengnian was vexed. Why do I feel like I'm not a good person? Jiang and I, who was in Su Jihu's arms, laughed. You just realized. Su Fengnian was pleasantly surprised. Look, you have dimples again. Jiang and I turned her head and was about to put on a straight face when Su Jihu gently poked her little dimple that could make all the men in the world drunk. She lowered her head and teased, you cute girl. Sister is willing to let that guy leave Gangnam-do, but I can't bear to let you go. Su Fengnian stretched out his hand and slapped it on the table in front of Jiang and I. After retracting his hand, it was the copper coin that he picked up from the spring water. He shamelessly said, I'll give it to you. Isn't that heroic? Jiang and I hesitated for a moment. Probably because of Su Jihu's face, she reached out and took the copper coin and held it in her hand. After the vegetarian meal was served, Su Jihu ate the wonton and said, Today there's a debate at Baogua Temple. Do you want to listen? Su Fengnian said indifferently, up to you. Su Jihu emphasized, you can listen, but you're not allowed to fight or kill. Su Fengnian buried his head in a vegetarian bun and said, Don't worry, Mr. Tang, she will definitely keep an eye on me. After breakfast, Su Jihu took him to see the peonies in Baogua Temple. Jiang and I and Li Chungang walked at the back. The little mud man took advantage of the fact that no one was paying attention and opened his palm. He peeked at the sweaty copper coin and then quickly clenched it tightly like a thief. The old god of swords who seemed to be looking left and right side in his heart. Mother, you silly girl. You're going to be eaten alive for the rest of your life. Could it be that a small copper coin is more valuable than this old man's lifetime of swordsmanship? Chapter 244. Most of the peonies in Baogua Temple had already passed their flowering period, so the two types of peonies, Yao, Huang, Wei, and Zi, no longer competed for beauty. Only a few relatively mediocre peonies were still blooming, such as the Mo Kue peonies that hid flowers in the leaves, which reduced their charm. However, a starving camel is still bigger than a horse. The peonies in Baogua Temple could still be considered splendid compared to Bailiang Palace. Just walking around the temple and admiring the scenery took up 3.5 hours. There was still some time before lunch, so the group of people sipped tea in an elegant meditation room. It was clearly a temple, but the one brewing the tea was a graceful Taoist nun. The emperors of the two dynasties all worshipped Taoism, following the example of their superiors and subordinates. Zhuang Lao Shui also said that tea was an important topic for the scholars of Gangnam-do. Many women of aristocratic families had the habit of devoting themselves to Huang Lao Shui's elegance. However, it was still somewhat strange for a Taoist nun to appear in the meditation room. She was about 30 years old, with red cheeks, long eyebrows, and blue eyebrows. She looked very much like a Taoist cultivator. Su Huipeng could be considered Su Fengnian's close friend. Probably because the two women were both widows, they had gotten closer over the years. Perhaps this Taoist nun loved the house and its crow, so she was quite polite to Su Fengnian. Although she did not speak much while brewing tea, most of her time was spent exchanging pleasantries with Su Weisheng. Occasionally, her gaze would meet His Royal Highness, and she would smile. The teapot was an exquisite tin bottle. It was expensive because it was tightly sealed, and the nature of tin was similar to the nature of tea. Before storing it, the large bottle was filled with water and the small bottle was blown to test for leakage. She looked like an expert in the way of tea. How could a layman like her understand these things? She only thought about how to make the jade more expensive. The teapot was a simple and unadorned style. She saw Su Fengnian staring at the teapot, so she explained, "My father came across this when he was young and went to the 2 Zen temples to listen to the teachings of the eminent monks. He took the mud from the hands of a monk who had been farming all year round and sank it to the bottom of a vat. He followed the pattern of the gall of a ginkgo tree in the 2 Zen temples and carved it into it. Later, for some unknown reason, it spread. The name of the pot came from, hiding one's fingerprints can welcome spring. However, in Yangzhou's ordinary wintering pots, the mud and sand are all dug from the head of the Yangtze River." Su Jihu was trying hard to insert a peony into Su Fengnian's hair bun, but Su Fengnian would rather die than comply. The brother and sister went back and forth, but Su Jihu, who had not succeeded in the end, panted and laughed, "That old monk is the great abbot of the 2 Zen temples. I heard that he has lived for 150 or 160 years. In the whole world, only the great master of the Dan Cauldron of Wudang Mountain in Bailiang, Song Jiming, can compare." Every 10 years, Uncle Su would go to the 2 Zen temples. Other than listening to Zen and scriptures, he would also ask the old monk for the mud for his hands. Therefore, a caddy of mud on the head of the Yangtze River is worth a caddy of gold. In the end, the teapot made by Uncle Su's father has the Buddhist aura. Su Fengnian had just taken a green jade teacup and was about to drink some tea when he heard that the teapot was made from the old monk's hand-washing mud. His expression immediately became unnatural. He could not drink the Buddhist aura, and he really did not want to drink it. However, since he had already boarded a pirate ship, it was difficult to disembark. He could only force himself to take a sip. He could not drink the tea properly, so he did not dare to blindly show off. The tea leaves and the spring water used to make the tea were naturally excellent, but as soon as he thought of the 3 words hand-washing mud, he felt a little discouraged and lost interest. In a moment of carelessness, Su Jihu inserted the peony flower into his hair, but he was too lazy to pull it out. For no reason, he thought of Miss Li Zi who claimed to live in the temple, and the little monk Zunan Nan. For a moment, he was lost in thought, and then he thought of the rumors about the old abbot of the 2 Zen temples. It was said that this old monk, who was regarded by the world as a holy monk and destined to be called an ancestor after his death, was very interesting. He was very illiterate. When he was young, he only chopped firewood and burned charcoal to support his mother. The family who bought firewood believed in Buddhism and often read the Diamond Sutra. Over time, he understood something. After his mother passed away, as soon as he went up the mountain, he received the mantle of the 2 Zen Buddhas, shaved his head, accepted the precepts, and became a monk to preach the Dharma in one go. It should be noted that he was preaching the Dharma and not the scriptures. Although this had something to do with his poor background and illiteracy, there was no doubt that this monk's comprehension was close to that of the great Buddha. Listening to the Diamond Sutra, he understood 10,000 things. The monks of the 2 Zen temples had recited more than 10,000 scriptures. However, when they asked this monk for advice on Buddhist scriptures, the monk would come straight to the point and say that he had never read their scriptures. Therefore, the monk only asked them to recite the scriptures. Often, when they recited a small part or half of the scriptures, the monk would say, "Stop," and then he would explain to them. No one disagreed. There was once a century-old abbot of the Fahua Temple, the largest temple in the southern kingdom, who asked a 40-year-old monk why he could not understand the meaning of the Lotus Sutra after reading it 10,000 times. In the end, after the old abbot recited only a few paragraphs, the young monk began to explain the meaning of the scriptures. The old abbot was enlightened and left with gratitude. When the world heard this, it was simply amazing. It was impossible to imagine how a monk who could not even read scriptures could save people. Even the immortal Chi of the Dragon Tiger Mountain had to salute him when he saw him. The 2 most outstanding figures of Buddhism appeared at the same time in a lotus debate 60 years ago, but the result left everyone confused. The 2 just sat facing each other without saying a word for the whole night. That was the last time the immortal Chi Xuanjun appeared in the world before he ascended. Chapter 245. When this monk was no longer young and grew older, no one had ever heard of him learning to read or read scriptures. Only when the white-clothed monk, who had been away for 15 years, returned. Did he have his disciple talk about scriptures for 3 days and 3 nights, nodding repeatedly. In the end, he risked universal condemnation and allowed the white-clothed monk to drink wine and marry a wife. Later on, he had an epiphany of betrayal. Su Fengnian was shocked and spilled tea all over the floor. He muttered to himself, "White-clothed monk Li Xiaoxin, Miss Li, who has lived in the temple since she was young." Taoist nun Su Huipeng had already seen that Su Fengnian was not in the mood to drink tea. Spilling tea like this was even more rude. How was it different from the secular world? She was somewhat unhappy, but did not say anything. She no longer had any thoughts of pouring a second cup of tea for His Royal Highness. It seemed that what the world said about the Bailiang heir having a golden exterior was not an exaggeration. Her sister, Su Shufei, who was originally expected to be the most favored in the harem, was suddenly banished to the cold palace. Everyone in the Su family was furious, but she was a widow and would not vent her anger on Su Jihu like the other members of the family. Last night, when she learned that His Royal Highness was stirring up trouble in the 2 counties, she only laughed it off. She did not even agree when the family told her to use Su Jihu to get close to His Royal Highness to find out the truth. Seeing it with her own eyes today, she was really disappointed. He was nothing more than relying on the king of Bailiang's family to bully others. This was no different from the useless descendants of the 4 great clans in Yangzhou. Su Huipeng glanced at Su Jihu, who she used to be able to talk to, and sighed in her heart. The tea was not cold, but the atmosphere was much colder. It was not something that could be changed by adding a few pieces of charcoal. Su Jihu seemed to be close to ink, and was not as quick to understand as before. He only said that he wanted to walk around Baogua Temple with his younger brother, and then left the meditation room. Su Hui sat quietly for a while, waiting for the group of people to leave. Then she slowly got up and walked out of the back door of the courtyard. She went straight up the tea mountain. After walking for half an hour, she finally saw a bamboo building. There was a bamboo chair under the bamboo eaves. An old man with snow-white eyebrows was sitting on it. On his knees was a shikigami with snow-white fur. The old man stroked the shikigami's head and looked at the mountain in the distance. The old man stretched out his hand and Su Hui sat upright on a small stool beside the bamboo chair. Before she could speak, the old man smiled kindly and said, "You came so early. You must be very disappointed." Su Huipeng said softly, "Old ancestor, you have a clear understanding of worldly affairs." The old man smiled and said, "That's good too. Since His Royal Highness can't be helped, then so be it. Us old fellows will also be relieved." Su Huipeng knew that her opinion might affect the future plans of the 4 great clans in Yang province. She said nervously, "Old ancestor, why don't you send someone to test him again? I'm afraid I'm wrong." The old man glanced at her. The Taoist nun, who already had a high status, was so scared that her delicate body trembled slightly. The old man stroked the shikigami's head and smiled. "What are you afraid of? Do you think a little girl like you will bear such a huge burden? That would be looking down on people like Xing Lian, Su Gong, and Lu Daolin. Yang province isn't that shabby." Su Huipeng's face was pale and she didn't dare to make a sound. The Minister of Personnel, Xing Lian, was the head of the Yu family in Jiang Xian. Lu Daolin was the head of the Lu family in Lake Pavilion. Dragon General, Su Gong. Although he wasn't the head of the Su family in Gumu, he was still a great general of the dynasty who held military power. However, when these talented big shots of Yang province saw this old ancestor, even if they did not tremble with fear like Su Huipeng, they still had to stand and speak respectfully. The reason why Su Huipeng could sit down was not only because she was a woman, but also because she was the granddaughter-in-law of this old consecrator of Yang province. How could the foundation and power of the enormous Jiangnan scholars group be compared to the Green Party with only 100 years of foundation? Hong Jia's escape to the north was planned by the old ancestor. There was also the family traits that evaluated the ranking of the clans in the world. A total of 9 people from the dynasty participated. The old ancestor's ranking was even higher than that of the current Grand Secretary, Zhang Julu. This was because when the old ancestor was young, he was under the same master as the old Grand Secretary and the Grand Preceptor of West Chu, Sun Shiji. No matter how powerful Zhang Julu was, he still had to consider himself a junior. The old man gazed into the distance. Today's debate between kings and tyrants will probably have to pick up the wisdom of others again. Su Huipeng hesitated but didn't say anything in the end. The old ancestor was involved in the debate between kings and tyrants at the pinnacle of the past 50 years. Naturally, he had the right to say this. The old man sighed. The old Grand Secretary was lucky to have Zhang Julu surpassing him. Otherwise, with his ability, he would only be a paperhanger in the empire. He was destined to be unsuitable after the Spring and Autumn War. It's good that he died. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to maintain his integrity in his later years. That old man's son from West Chu is miserable. In terms of reputation, the two of us added together can't compare to him. Now, among the scholars, he only loses to Su Rintu in terms of infamy. It's better for him to die. Su Huipeng only listened with an open mind. The old man heard the lion-cat meow and lowered his head to look. He smiled. It's not good for that crown prince to not be able to rise. It's a good thing in the short term. In the long term, wouldn't we have lived in vain after being called old by Tang Shi Sword Immortal for so many years? Su Huipeng fell to his knees. The old man muttered, "What happened between you and Lu Baijie in the past is nothing. Get up. The ground is cold and it's not good to get cold. One has to be down to earth, but this isn't the way to do it." Su Huipeng stood up shakily and sat down again. The old man narrowed his eyes and said, "Go. Let that humble scholar meet his Royal Highness. With him coming up with plans for Bailiang, he won't lose to Zhao Guangling and Su Rintu back then. This stagnant water will be revived." Su Huipeng stood up gently. The old man said calmly, "Go and recommend yourself to that crown prince. Only then can you completely sever your relationship with Lu Baijie." This female Taoist priest who had been pure of heart and few desires for many years didn't refuse. When she left, she bit her lip until it bled. Chapter 246. Su Huipeng walked along the Tea Mountain path and finally walked out of the great ancestor's field of vision. She stood among the tea bushes and looked at the yellow glazed roof pavilion at the top of the Baogua temple, lost in thought. Other than the blood from biting her lip, there was not much grief on her face. She did not hate the great ancestor's arrangement, she only hated the green-robed swordsman for not fighting back then. She cultivated wholeheartedly and had the ability to retain her youthful appearance. She looked like a 30-year-old woman, but she was actually close to 40. When she first met him, she was only 13. How many 13s could there be in life? She wiped away the blood and walked down the mountain with a gloomy face. Su Huipeng did not know that the green-robed swordsman had been watching for many years in the depths of the shade. After seeing her enter the Baogua temple, he slowly walked toward the bamboo building. The old man and cat were still there. The snowball-like Shih Tzu screamed. The dozing old Yangzhou minister of offerings raised his eyelids with some difficulty and looked at the unpolished jade carefully carved by the Lu family. This swordsman used to be so high-spirited. If it were not for the fact that he could not overcome the barrier of love, he would have gone very far whether he was an official or a swordsman. The old man comforted the frightened Shih Tzu on his knees and frowned. He asked calmly, "Did you hear that?" Tangshi sword fairy Lu Baijie nodded. He looked at the old man coldly with one finger on the scabbard. It looked like the ancient sword could be unsheathed at any time. With Lu Baijie's attainments in the sword evaluation, he could unsheath his sword very quickly. He did not need to show it deliberately. Of course, this was Lu Baijie expressing his position. If the old man did not take back his words to Su Huipeng, he did not mind doing another disgraceful act as Tangshi sword fairy and not as a disciple of the Lu family. So what if you are the old master of the Jiangxinyu family? I, Lu Baijie, have a sword in my hand and a clear conscience. Why should I care? Yu Jinkang's eyelids trembled. One of his hands was no longer stroking the snow-white Chausi. Instead, his 5 fingers formed a claw and gripped the pet's head. However, he didn't use any strength. The Chelsea, which instinctively felt uncomfortable, didn't seem to understand. It turned its head. Yu Jiankong, one of the few people in the dynasty who had hopes of obtaining the posthumous title of Wenzhong after his death, suddenly laughed self-mockingly. As for the posthumous title of Wenzheng, that was even higher than Wenzhong, the dynasty had been empty for 120 years. Even he didn't have any extravagant hopes. The old man only looked again at the distant green mountains. There were many mountains and rivers in Jiangnan, and he never got tired of looking at them. There was actually a rare hint of compromise in his light tone. He said softly, "Tangxi, you know that back then, my original intention was for you to be the head of the Lu family." Lu Daolin was also willing. Lu Baijie rudely interrupted, "I don't want to." Old consecrator Yu Jian frowned and said, "You are unwilling to marry the pearl of the Yu family, unwilling to become the head of the Lu family, unwilling to be recommended to become an official, unwilling to be a general. As a child of the Lu family, Tangxi, do you know that there are too many things you are unwilling to do that are against the rules? If you didn't slack off like this, how could the Lu family even surpass the Bo family and the Yuan family and suppress you all?" Lu Baijie was silent. Her finger no longer touched the scabbard. The old consecrator sighed and extended his hand, indicating for this junior that he had once thought highly of to sit on the stool. After Lu Baijie sat down, Yu Jiankong, who had specially rushed over from Jiangxin County to Baogua Temple today, smiled. "It's a pity that she's not a descendant of the Yu family. The juniors of my family are more than steady, but lacking in drive. They can only preserve what they have, and it's very difficult for them to revive. How would they dare to call us old fellows old farts? Even if they have resentment, they don't even dare to curse in their stomachs. At such a young age, they all have an unbearable stench of lethargy. Tangxi, do you know why I'm making things difficult for a girl like Su Huipeng?" Sword immortal Tangxi shook her head. The old consecrator picked up the Persian cat with both hands and sighed. "How is she worthy of you?" Lu Baijie smiled bitterly. "But I just can't let go of her." The old man snorted coldly. "Your father had a son in his later years, and he especially doted on you. Before he died, he even left a letter for me and Su Yinsheng. Ignoring the rules of the sect, he didn't hesitate to hand over some of his family's assets and take the risk of inviting a wolf into the house, begging us to help you become the head of the Lu family. Do you really think Lu Daolin doesn't know this secret?" I could have kept it a secret, but Su Yinsheng had already revealed it to him. These past few years, Gumu has used the Lu family's influence to secretly grow stronger. The wolf has already entered the house, but you have greatly disappointed your father. It's true that Lu Daolin is a good person, but how can he take advantage of a group of treacherous people like Gumu's Su family? Let's not talk about the distant matters. Empress Zhao watched coldly from the sidelines and remembered all of this in her heart. Do you really think that Empress Zhao would be as close as sisters with that girl from the Su family? This time, the crown prince of Bailiang stirred up trouble and angered the Gangnam-do scholars. The 30,000 students of the Imperial College in the capital were incited. How can your brother be safe in the Imperial College? If nothing unexpected happens, Lu Daolin, who can't do anything inside or outside, will take the blame and resign as the right chancellor. Huan Shu, who has been fighting with your brother for many years, will naturally be happy to take advantage of the situation. The Lu family's setback in the capital, in the end, isn't it Yang Zhou's loss? If not, why would I, an old man with one foot in the coffin, come here? To listen to the boring difference between a king and a tyrant? Or to be threatened by you with a sword? Sword Fairy Tangxi said calmly, "Uncle, aren't you afraid of playing the lute to a cow by telling me this?" It wasn't clear whether he was angry at her misfortune or lamenting her incompetence, but the old consecrator was vaguely angry. He raised his voice and said, "Tangxi, I can prevent Su Hui from doing that thing, but this time, you have to come out and share the burden of the Lu family. Otherwise, with my temper, letting an insignificant Su Hui go and embarrass the Gumu Su family all these years is just a reminder to them. Tangxi, I'll ask you one last time. Are you willing to go to the capital to be the assistant minister of the Ministry of War? No matter how you become a fourth-rank official in the capital, I'm only asking if you are willing or not." Lu Baijie said bitterly, I only ask that you don't make things difficult for her. The old consecrator smiled slightly and returned to his usual carefree state. He said with a pleasant expression, Tang Shi, those who are closely involved can't see clearly. If you are willing to be an official, who would dare to make things difficult for her? Lu Baijie shook her head and said, even the daughter of the king of Bailiang is bullied like this. She is only an abandoned child of the Gumu Su family. How can I be at ease? The old man said calmly, all right, I can make an agreement with you. You go to the capital. After all, she is the granddaughter-in-law of the Yu family in name. No one can bully her. Sword Fairy Tang Shi, Lu Baijie stood up and left calmly with her hands clasped in front. The old man narrowed his eyes and leaned back in his chair. His thoughts were unfathomable. Chapter 247. A pair of master and servant walked out of the bamboo building. They were the young master holding a fan and the green-robed swordsman who had seen the Bailiang's light cavalry in the restaurant. The handsome young master had changed into an ivory fan with 3 different beauties painted on it. He squatted beside the old guardian Yu Jiankong and reached out to pet his Persian cat. He raised his head and smiled, old ancestor, why do you have to trouble yourself to let Sword Immortal Tangxi become an official? The Lu family's foundation is not much worse than our Yu family's. One Lu Daolin is nothing to be afraid of, but with this one, it's hard to say. How can Lady Yuan and Lady Gumu Su enter your eyes? However, once the Lu family has Sword Immortal Tangxi, as long as they earn some military merits, they can become an assistant minister of the Ministry of War. In another 7 or 8 years, with the Lu family support, it won't be difficult for them to take charge of a ministry. Compared to Lady Su Shufei, it will be more important. The old guardian smiled, Lady Su Shufei is nothing. To tell you the truth, no matter which family's woman enters the palace, she will not be a match for Empress Zhao. Nowadays, taking the path of a foreign relative is the stupidest method. Lady Gumu Su does not believe in heresy and is short-sighted. Sooner or later, she will cause trouble. However, the path of a dynasty's military and politics is very profitable. Our Gangnam-do doesn't lack scholars, but we lack people like Lu Baijie who can immediately make contributions. Whether it's in the long run or in the private sector, I will let him enter the Ministry of War. As for whether Lu Baijie can emerge from the cracks between Lame Su, Gu Jiantang, and the other vassals, we will have to take it one step at a time. With Lu Baijie's personality, he can at most become a general and not a minister of the Ministry of War. However, we can distract the Lu family, create a rift between the Lu family and the Su family, make Lady Yuan, who has been arrogant all these years, feel as if there is a fishbone stuck in her throat. We can also make the Lu family feel indebted to our Yu family. Think about it, how many can we achieve in one fell swoop? The young master held the fan with 2 fingers and smiled, 4. After pondering for a while, the young and handsome young master opened his fan and said carefully, Ancestor, the Su and Lu families are in-laws after all. If Sword Immortal Tangxi controls the military power in the future, it seems that he can make the imperial court fear Bailiang even more. The old man was gratified and said, this is only half a gain and half a loss. It's not good to talk nonsense. Cripple Su and Lu Baijie's personalities are naturally incompatible. His Majesty may not be unable to see it. Even if His Majesty can't see it, Empress Zhao can see it clearly. In this world, the marriage between the aristocratic families is only stable because of the study of aristocratic families like ours. Deep down, the Su and Lu families look down on each other. But for you to be able to see this point, it's already not bad. The young master smiled and opened his fan. He fanned the elder ancestor and the Persian cat to cool them down. The old man said softly, although I called that guy Lame Su, he's still the demon slayer who destroyed nearly half of the youths in 8 countries. He even trampled on the righteousness of spring and autumn. He's not someone a child like you can casually provoke. Thus, don't think about how to vent your anger on the small fights in the restaurant. If you make a mistake, you'll be inviting trouble to yourself. Lame Su's protectiveness is something that you children haven't personally experienced. I don't care if you don't understand it now, you just have to remember these words. The delaying tactics of small officials can give even ministers and generals headaches. When it comes to you, you have to learn to wait. It's a good thing to be young. You can wait. Whether it's Zhang Julu or Gu Jiantang, their achievements today are all due to waiting. The young master nodded. He didn't dare to take the elder ancestor's advice lightly. Although it was a bit regretful that he couldn't immediately trip up the Bailiang heir, since even the elder ancestor said to wait, he was only a bastard son of the Yu family. He naturally didn't dare to disobey and understood the importance of patience. At this time, Su Fengnian only brought Princess Jing'an with him as they walked and stopped in Baogua Temple. As they walked, they arrived at the foot of the crouching dragon pine outside the temple. There was shade and a clear spring. Su Fengnian sat on a rock beside the spring. He was particularly comfortable in the scorching heat. Today, Baogua Temple was hosting an unprecedentedly grand debate. Ordinary pilgrims couldn't enter the temple to burn incense and worship Buddha. There were several monks standing guard at the entrance. Other than familiar faces, ordinary people had to hand over their name badges. Only those with sufficient status could enter. Su Fengnian saw a poor and pedantic scholar pacing back and forth outside the temple for a long time. The sun was scorching hot and he was quickly covered in sweat. He guessed that it was because Su Fengnian was dressed in brocade and had an extremely charming maid serving him by the spring. He didn't dare to come forward to enjoy the shade. In Gangnam-do, it was a great shame for a descendant of an aristocratic family to sit at the same table as a child of a humble family. Of course, the scholar didn't dare to ask for trouble. However, he really couldn't endure the heat of the sun. After hesitating for a long time, he finally squatted down at the spot furthest away from Su Fengnian by the spring. He cupped a handful of water and splashed it on his face. It was extremely comfortable and he let out a long breath. After squatting for a while, he saw that Su Fengnian didn't make a sound. Only then did he carefully sit down and wipe his wet hands on his sleeve. He took out a book from his bosom and silently began to read. Su Fengnian glanced at it out of the corner of his eye. It wasn't a book commonly seen in Jiangnan, but rather the For Scriptures, Chapters and Sentences collection, by the great scholar of Bailiang, Yao Baifeng. Looking at the scholar's lips, it was even more interesting. It was simply deviating from the classics to the extreme. Mr. Yao's interpretation of the scriptures, based on what I have seen, may not be the saint's original edict. There are many things to consider. His words are too high, but he exerts his own will too much, overflowing the original scriptures. He has the suspicion of wanting to surpass the saint, so that he treads on empty air without substance. It is not the orthodox interpretation of the scriptures. However, compared to the meticulous Confucianism of the school of learning, there are still many lovely aspects. There is less restraint and more understanding. Su Fengnian observed the scholar's lips and felt it was very interesting. Especially when the shabby scholar closed the book and said, "I, a scholar, will be buried in the grave." He couldn't help but laugh out loud, startling the scholar. His hand trembled and the For Scriptures, Chapters and Sentences collection fell into the water. The scholar hurriedly jumped into the water. Seeing the soaked book curled into a ball, his heart ached so much that his face was gloomy. After climbing ashore, his soul seemed to have left his body. Even if he tore off a page of this soaked book to dry, it would probably be more than half destroyed. For a moment, he sighed in despair. Su Fengnian joked, "How much is a book worth?" The scholar didn't raise his head and said, "This book is indeed not worth much, but if I read it, I can make quite a bit of money." Su Fengnian clicked his tongue and said, "There is a saying that a well-read scholar sells the emperor, but you can't even enter Baogua Temple. Who cares about you?" The shabby scholar smiled and lowered his head, minding his own business. "Who said I was going to sell it to the emperor? The sage Yunxiu governs the country and pacifies the world, but there is no such thing as the emperor." Su Fengnian bent down and picked up a watermelon that had been chilled for some time from the spring water. He reached out and knocked on it. It just happened to split into two. He smiled and said, "Do you want to eat?" The scholar raised his head with a puzzled expression. Su Fengnian smiled and said, "You don't dare?" The scholar didn't say anything and only frowned. Su Fengnian simply threw half of the watermelon over. The scholar was flustered and managed to catch it with great difficulty. Seeing Su Fengnian engrossed himself in eating, he lowered his head and ate a mouthful. The coldness penetrated his heart and lungs. Su Fengnian joked, "To be buried in the grave, what great ambition." The scholar paused for a moment. This time, his heart and lungs were really cold. Chapter 248. The Confucian school of exegesis was the same as the Buddhist school of Buddhism. Exegesis was not the same as reading the scriptures, nor was it the same as talking about the scriptures. Both were things that only a great scholar could do. His Royal Highness, this poor and pedantic scholar in front of him, dared to make irresponsible remarks about Yao Bai, the great scholar of Confucianism, who was famous for his exegesis of the scriptures. As for the ambition of the so-called posthumous title of Wenzheng, it was even more shocking. Even the old consecrator of Yang province, Yu Jiankong, only hoped that it would be a great fortune to have a Wenzhong behind him. In the spring and autumn period, heroes vied for the deer. After Li Yang ascended to the throne, there was a clear standard for the posthumous titles of officials. The civil officials used Wenzheng as the leader, but this posthumous title had been vacant for 100 years. Wenzhen followed closely behind, and everyone in the court viewed it as the possession of Grand Secretary Zhang Julu. After that was Zhong Duan, Kang Yi, and so on. Since Wenzheng and Wenzhen did not dare to hope for it, then Wenzhong became the most popular item for the various vassals and top civil officials in the dynasty. In today's world, in order to determine the status of aristocratic families, the number and weight of posthumous titles was undoubtedly an extremely important standard. Normal scholars did not dare to say that they would be posthumous to Wenzheng even if they died. Once exposed, if it was a small matter, it would be considered improper conduct. If it was a serious matter, it might even lead to imprisonment. The scholar's heart was pained when a book of the four classics fell into the water. It was clear that he came from a poor family. Having his thoughts exposed by an outsider, the scholar's panic disappeared in a flash. He soon calmed down and lowered his head to continue eating the iced watermelon. After Su Fengnian exposed his thoughts, he did not continue to be unforgiving. Instead, he was aroused by the posthumous title. It was natural for civil officials to have a posthumous title, and military officials were no exception. There were relatively few titles with the word military, but there were still 18 characters. Therefore, there was a saying that a real man should have 18 posthumous titles. The character E took the top spot. The first 9 were Eli, Ning Jing, Ping Xiang, Jing, Min Su. It was rumored that great General Gu Jiantang had already given the posthumous title of Wu Jing. Eli, Ning San, was still a huge suspense. Unlike civil officials, military officials often had lower posthumous titles. Generally speaking, it was a great honor to have one of the first 9 posthumous titles. This was related to how aristocratic families despised military officials. Of course, if a military official could have a posthumous title, it would be an even greater honor. This was only favored by those military officials who came from rich and powerful families. For example, Tengxi's sword immortal Liu Baijie was able to become an official. After her death, it was not impossible for her posthumous title to take the lead. Su Shao had never been too concerned about this. He always said that after 3 generations, it would be enough to have a passable posthumous title. This was because no matter how favored the court officials were at the time, no matter how outstanding their achievements were, it was not an exception to change their posthumous titles after death. Su Fengnian's absent-mindedness was awakened by a burst of cheers from the Baogua temple. It could be said that the debate between the kings and the tyrants had already begun. The other person was the eminent monk Yin Daolin of the Baogua temple. Shi Lin respectfully called him the motionless monk. He did not speak much, but when he spoke, he was sure to amaze the world. His 2 famous battles with Lu Yan and Lu Xianlang, the Yi Xiang Yu Jiaxing, and the 4 Books of Talents, were both held at the Baogua Temple. It could be said that the reason why the Baogua Temple could become the holy land of the Jiangnan Dao, other than the beautiful scenery and the borrowing of thousands of peonies from the Wei Ziyao Huang, was mainly attributed to this elegant old monk who had a good reputation and a good reputation. The other person was the eminent monk Yin Daolin of the Baogua Temple. Shi Lin respectfully called him the motionless monk. He did not speak much, but when he spoke, he was sure to amaze the world. His two famous battles with Lu Yan and Lu Xianlang, the Yi Xiang Yu Jiaxing, and the 4 Books of Talents, were both held at the Baogua Temple. It could be said that the reason why the Baogua Temple could become the holy land of the Jiangnan Dao, other than the beautiful scenery and the thousands of peonies that borrowed the influence of the Wei Xiao Huang, it was also due to this elegant old monk who had a good reputation. The other person was the eminent monk Yin Daolin of the Baogua Temple. Shi Lin respectfully called him the motionless monk. Su Fengnian finished eating the watermelon and asked, "Do you want to participate in this debate? I heard that as long as you win a few, it will be more useful than obtaining scholarly honors." The scholar who had only eaten a few mouthfuls of watermelon smiled and shook his head. He said self-deprecatingly, "I was fortunate enough to participate once and was chased out after saying a few words. I don't know if I won or lost, but I probably lost. The scholar from the Yuan family who debated with me will probably be recorded as one person removed." Su Fengnian caught a glimpse of the female Taoist nun Su Hui rushing out of Baogua Temple and walking straight over. He ignored her and looked at the scholar in front of him. He smiled and said, "Isn't this something to be expected? I'm guessing that you will be sitting alone during the debate, right?" The Taoist nun walked closer and said, "Your Highness guessed wrong this time." Su Fengnian had a look of realization. He said, "Sister Su brought me in?" The Taoist nun Su Hui nodded with a smile and explained, "Young Master Zhang is full of wisdom and is especially good at debating. He is original and ingenious. He once asked me to explain the advantages and disadvantages of military and political affairs to Su Gong." The general commented that he did not stick to one pattern and that it was not easy to do. Su Fengnian was slightly surprised and said, "Oh." During lunch, he chatted with his elder sister Su Jihu about Su Hui's family background. The general of Gumu Su's family, Dragon General Su Gong, was the mainstay of the family. This general, who was good at both military and political affairs, was born in a rich and powerful family. He presided over the military affairs of the 3 provinces in Gangnam-do. He had made a lot of bold and decisive reforms and tidied up the government. Su Shao thought highly of this person. Since he could be praised by Su Shao, who was known to be arrogant, he was naturally a very powerful character. As for the 6 matters that disappeared in Yangzhou, even Su Fengnian might not believe it. There was a copy in Su Zhao's study room and he circled a lot of it himself. As for how to strengthen the border defense and solve the financial problems, Su Fengnian had seen it with his own eyes, so there was no need to doubt its weight. On the way to Hutting County, he had specially asked Lu Qiu to get a copy, but he did not expect it to be written by the poor scholar in front of him. He just did not know how this child Zhang was related to Su Hui. The relationship between a woman from a rich family and a poor scholar was just a beautiful scene in a novel about a scholar and a beauty. Especially in Gangnam-do, where family status was very important, it was even more unrealistic. This was probably the reason why Wang Dongxiang's The First Snow was so popular in Gangnam-do. During the banquet, Su Jihu bluntly talked about the grudges between Su Huipeng and Lu Baijie, as well as the Lu, Yu, and Su families. It was obviously impossible for this female Taoist nun to be tired of this poor scholar. This made Su Fengnian even more curious. Could it be that this scholar was really a great talent in running a country? Born in a poor family, it was really rare for him to have a strategic vision. Su Zhao's former right-hand men, Yang Talent, Zhao Guangling and Yin Talent, Li Shan, were not poor scholars. They were real gentry families. Su Fengnian was just about to exchange some pleasantries when he found that Tang Shi Sword Fairy had also appeared. Su Hui's face immediately darkened and she turned a blind eye. Lu Baijie smiled bitterly. When the poor scholar saw this one of Lu's glittering 7 jades, he did not bow to her and seemed to be familiar with her. He took the initiative to bow to her, but he regarded himself as a nephew. This kind of arrogance would make a scholar's hair stand up in anger. Tang Shi Sword Fairy was a celestial figure, so what kind of person was this nobody? How dare he not avoid or retreat? Was he not afraid of dirtying the eyes of Mr. Lu Qi? Lu Baijie also seemed to have a good impression of the scholar. She gave him a few words of sincere encouragement before turning to look at Su Huipeng. She hesitated for a moment before saying, "I want to talk to you." Su Hui sneered and said, "Mr. Lu Qi has avoided suspicion for so many years. Why are you making an exception today?" Chapter 249. Su Fengnian and the poor scholar both automatically turned their heads. With a tacit understanding, they decided not to look or listen. This pair of man and woman, who had stirred up a great commotion in Gangnam-do, were in a deadlock. In the end, it was the female Taoist Su Huipeng who was defeated. She walked with Lu Baijie along the quiet and empty wall of Baogua Temple. Before leaving, Su Huipeng did not forget to bid farewell to His Royal Highness. Then she told the scholar that there was no harm in entering the temple to debate. She had already told Baogua Temple that no one would stop them. So there were only 3 people left by the spring. The scholar surnamed Zhang frowned slightly. Su Fengnian smiled and said, "My surname is Su and my given name is Dian Xia. Dian as in classic, Xia as in sword case. What do you think of my name?" The poor scholar smiled and said, "Dian in the case cannot cry." A good name." Princess Jing and Pei Nanwei, whose face was covered with a veil, could not help but roll her eyes. Su Fengnian asked, "Since you have permission, why don't you go in and listen to the debate? As for me, I'm just an idiot. Since Sister Su said that your talent is not ordinary and I want to bask in your glory, I'll sit with you." The scholar asked in return, "Sitting with me, aren't you afraid of being laughed at by the scholars and celebrities?" Su Fengnian smiled strangely and did not answer. Instead, he turned his head and asked Princess Pei, "Tell me, am I afraid?" Princess Jing, who had suffered a lot along the way, did not dare to ignore the question. Her tone was stiff and cold as she said, "Not at all." Su Fengnian was satisfied. He smiled and looked at the poor scholar. The latter sighed and nodded. He put down the finished watermelon and picked up the 4 classics, chapter and sentence collection, which had been exposed to the sun, and carefully put it into his sleeve. The 3 of them walked out of the shade of the ancient pine tree and walked toward Baogua Temple. Su Fengnian was in the middle, Princess Jing, was on the left, and the poor scholar was on the right. There was a difference between who came first and who came first. As soon as the 3 of them left, Su Fengnian saw a little girl who had been wandering at the foot of the wall trotting to the spring. Previously, because of his presence, the sallow and skinny little beggar-like child did not dare to come forward to enjoy the shade, so she hid in the corner. After the 3 of them left, she finally gathered her courage and went to the spring under the tree. First, she lifted the 2 halves of the watermelon and placed them on a rock by the spring. But when she inadvertently met eyes with Su Fengnian, the little girl in ragged clothes turned pale and quickly put the watermelon back to its original place. Seeing that this rich and imposing child was not angry, she timidly squatted under the tree. The scholar was afraid that this aristocratic scholar, who was familiar with Tangshi Sword Fairy and Su Huipeng, would be unhappy, so he said softly, "This child is pitiful. She begs for a living and depends on her paralyzed grandfather. If it weren't for her, the old man would not have survived last winter. I taught her some words so that she can use some tricks when begging. Alas, her grandfather must have fallen ill again. Otherwise, she would not have come to Baogua Temple to pick up copper coins. She doesn't dare to pick up too much each time. It's only a few copper coins, enough to buy half a basket of steamed buns, but it's enough food for her and her grandfather for several days." As for the watermelon, Su Fengnian said expressionlessly, after slicing the watermelon rind, "It can be fried as a dish." The poor scholar nodded after a moment of shock, yes. It must have been the first time Princess Jing'an had heard that watermelon rind could be used to cook a dish. She unconsciously glanced at the little girl. The debate between Baogua Temple's Wang and Ba attracted many Gangnam-do scholars. Those who had the qualifications to participate in the grand occasion had already entered the temple and taken their seats. There were also many ordinary scholars who did not have the qualifications to join in the fun and could only wander around outside the temple. The area under Wulong Pine Tree was a treasured land of feng shui. It was originally occupied by Su Fengnian. His Royal Highness was a dandy who did not need to speak and had a domineering arrogance. It was obvious that he was not a person to get close to. In addition, he came from the temple, so the scholars outside the temple could only stand far away. Most of them pointed at the servant girl, whose face could not be seen clearly but who had an enchanting figure. She was a feast for the eyes. In this world, when the rich and powerful went out, they usually looked at the people and horses. As for the noble and famous people, they looked at the beautiful women by their side. The female Taoist nun who came from a noble family was the first class. People like Su Huipu could only be found but not sought. Next, the beautiful and talented courtesans were also the first class. The young and beautiful maids in one's own residence were second. The more there were, the more it showed one's status. A great scholar in Gangnam-do, such as Yuan Jiangyan of the Yuan family, had once gone out with almost 100 young boys and girls. When the Su Fengnian finally made room, a few well-dressed young masters and daughters immediately went up to enjoy the cool air. The little beggar who had rolled up his trousers and bent down to pick up the money in the spring was undoubtedly an eyesore. A triangular-eyed young master sneered and kicked a watermelon into the spring, splashing water everywhere. The little beggar was so scared that he shivered and did not dare to pick up the copper coins anymore. He wanted to dodge, but he walked too fast in the water and accidentally fell into the spring, causing a burst of laughter. A woman from a noble family with heavy makeup gloated and scolded sharply, "Little bastard, who let you come here to pick up the wishing money? Aren't you afraid of being beaten to death by the monks in the temple?" The spring was surrounded by the rich and powerful young masters who were enjoying the cool air. The little beggar had nowhere to hide and could only stand in the spring. He lowered his head and said with red eyes, "The temple said that as long as I pick up a few copper coins each time, it's not a big deal." The woman shouted, "You still dare to talk back?" She was angry. Since there were no outsiders around, she was too lazy to pretend to be a virtuous lady. She picked up a stone from the ground and threw it fiercely. The little beggar instinctively dodged, but the woman did not hit him. She was already angry because she was not allowed to enter the temple, but now she was even more annoyed. She picked up a stone the size of an egg and laughed gloomily, "You still dare to dodge? If you dodge again, I'll break your legs." She threw the stone with all her strength and it hit the little beggar's chest with a thump. The men and women around her clapped and cheered, praising her accuracy. The little girl's thin and weak body could not withstand such torment. She swayed and her face was pained, but she still did not dare to dodge. She stood in the water and said with a sobbing tone, "I won't dare to pick it up again. I won't dare to do it again." The young woman sneered and picked up a few more stones. She even distributed them to her friends. It was better to be happy together than to be happy alone. They prepared to play a game similar to throwing bamboo arrows into a pot. Gangnam-do scholars always had the custom of throwing pots in a song to liven things up. Many famous scholars were good at blind throwing screens and back throwing. The dragon general Su Gong could even fill a pot with more than 100 bamboo arrows. In the end, it presented a scene like a forest of arrows and mountains of arrows. This throwing pot could be considered the evolution of shooting in the 6 arts of gentlemen. It was very popular in Gangnam-do. However, today the bamboo arrows were replaced with stones and the pot turned into a little beggar. In the eyes of the young masters and ladies, it was a different approach to achieve the same result. Those who got the stones were eager to try and aim. It seemed that they did not care if the little beggar's body could withstand a few throws. To Gangnam-do scholars, smashing a little beggar to death was nothing. The poor scholar, who already had one foot in the door of Baogwa Temple, apologized and ran back. He angrily said, "Stop." With this roar, the foppish young masters and ladies were stunned. However, it was only for a moment. They looked at each other and laughed, no longer paying attention. The 2 impatient young masters instead increased their strength and threw stones at the little beggar in the water. One hit his chest and the other hit his arm. The little beggar bit his lip and did not dare to make a sound. He only crouched in the cold spring water that reached his knees and curled up. Where was the human heart not colder than water? However, the little beggar, who was in extreme pain, still squeezed out a pale smile. He said to the poor scholar who stepped forward bravely, "Brother Zhang, it's okay. It won't hurt after a few hits." "It won't hurt." How could it not hurt? Facing Lu Baijie and Su Huipeng, the most outstanding young masters in Yang province, the poor scholar could still jump into the water without being servile or overbearing. He no longer cared about whether or not the books in his sleeves would get wet. He stood in front of the little beggar to protect him. His face was mournful. Looking at this group of gentry men and women who relied on their families for their entire lives, there was no greater sorrow than a dead heart. He did not even question them. The arrogant woman who started it all had a face of disdain. She said condescendingly, "Where did you come from, you poor pig?" At this time, a mellow voice came from behind the gentry. "I came from Bailiang." Chapter 250. In Gangnam-do, the scholars formed a forest, and the commoners from the poor families relied on the scholars to grow trees and weeds. Cutting down a few bad trees and weeds was not a big deal. However, the scholars from the big families were proud of their status and did not deliberately target the commoners. They probably felt that it was beneath their status. However, the disciples from the Renmin and the Li sect, who were a notch higher than the poor families, were particularly bad. They spared no effort to show off their status. The young masters and daughters from the Baogua temple who made things difficult for the little beggars belonged to the category of neither high nor low. They wagged their tails and begged for pity. The noblemen's farts were fragrant. However, when they squinted at the people below them, the commoners would feel that they were vulgar even if they wrote a real beautiful article. Needless to say, these two groups of people had excellent eyesight. They were able to see through the poor scholar's family background with a single glance. Of course, they were unscrupulous. However, when they turned around and saw the young man who claimed to be the crown prince, they were somewhat apprehensive. After all, the tailoring and texture of his luxurious clothes, as well as his superior aura, could not be faked. The heir was a title that only the legitimate sons of the kings and dukes in ancient times could have. In the past 500 years, the noble families gradually took control of the government. It was only then that it became more widespread. The descendants of the kings and the legitimate sons of the big families could be called heir. In Gangnam-do, the descendants of generals were the descendants. Other than the children of General Su Gong, no one dared to go out with a sword. Moreover, General Long Xiang was originally from the Gu Mu Su family and was not an orthodox family of generals. Gangnam-do advocated feather fans and silk scarves, and ox cart wielders. They did not like the swords and sabers that were used by low-level rangers. Then, who was the heir in front of them? For a moment, they were a little uncertain. After all, this unbelievably handsome guy was talking and laughing with Mr. Tang Shi and Miss Su. No matter how they guessed, he could not be an ordinary person. But then again, if his family was really extraordinary, why would he hang out with the poor scholar in the spring? Heir. In Gangnam-do, there were more than a pair of hands who were qualified to be called heir. However, they had never heard of any heir who liked to carry a sword. Did he come from Bailiang? Was he born in the wild Bailiang, or had he just returned from his travels? The woman who was the first to make trouble for the little beggar felt her eyes brighten. She had no time to think about it. She sighed inwardly, "What a handsome child. He's so good-looking. It would be even better if he didn't wear a saber so rudely." She secretly let go of the stone in her hand and threw away the stone in her hand. She looked coquettishly at the unfamiliar heir, who was walking towards her. Just as she was about to bend her waist and salute him, Su Fengnian was a little bored. It seemed that these guys did not understand his words. They did not associate him with the devil of Bailiang who killed Lu Lighting. Otherwise, this woman would not have the guts to flirt here. Gangnam-do was different from Bailiang, where only he could call himself heir. A heir was not that valuable. If the eldest legitimate son of a big family called himself heir, no one would chase after him. In Bailiang, if anyone dared to do so, they would have been visited by Su Fengnian with his servants and dogs. Su Fengnian smiled and slowly pulled out his saber. He was about to kill. Throwing a pot is very elegant, isn't it? I don't want to take these heads, so I'll take the arm. Aren't Gangnam-do good at cursing people? I'll keep your mouths open. Su Fengnian's subtle movement seemed to be noticed by the poor scholar. He said softly, "No." Su Fengnian turned his head and asked with his eyes. The poor scholar tilted his head, indicating that there was still a little girl standing behind him who had no one to rely on in Yangchun. How could the little beggar withstand the revenge after this? Su Fengnian frowned. His thumb was still on the hilt of his shudong saber. The group of belated disciples finally regained their senses. The seductive woman was so scared that she took a few steps back. If it weren't for the support of the strangely handsome triangular-eyed young master who was flattering her, she would have fallen into the spring. Drawing a sword at the slightest disagreement, what kind of impolite barbarian would do such a stupid thing? My ass. He must be from a small place. Yamen was a special name for the descendants of officials in Gangnam-do. The military camp used animal teeth as decorations, and the camp gate was also known as the Tooth Gate. Therefore, Yamen was a very good image and soon spread. However, in Gangnam-do, no matter how big the Yamen was, it was extremely disliked. General was a derogatory name given by scholars, so how good could Yamen be? Unless it was in the border towns where there were vassals stationed and the military officers were powerful, Yamen had the capital to be arrogant. Families had a genealogy. Naturally, the children of officials and rich families were also ranked according to their ranks. Not to mention the capital where there were as many influential people as there were hairs on a cow. In the local areas, the eldest son of a rich family, the son of a provincial governor and a supervisor of a case, were of course the first class of young masters. Next were the children of a county chief, plus the descendants of a general aristocratic family, followed by the sons of gentry and ordinary officials with real power. Finally, it was the children of the enslavement and the official school. The rank of the father was the most important consideration. Although the famous scholars with profound family knowledge did not have a title, they were better than ordinary officials. Born in such a family, the enslavement and the official school could not be easily compared to them. If one added the important areas of the capital under the emperor's feet, it would be even more complicated. Those palace scholars, 6 ministers, several great generals, deep-rooted families with hundreds of years of history, among them were the powerful officials and retired meritorious deeds, and then there was the extremely reclusive son of a distant relative. These prominent circles were intertwined. Who could distinguish between them? But apart from the capital, there was one thing that everyone knew. In the local areas, in front of the 6 vassals, especially the only one with a different surname in the dynasty, no matter who you were, you had to be well behaved. If you were a snake, you had to coil up. If you were a tiger, you had to lie down. Among the vassals, Zhao Ying, the Duke of Huainan, was the most aloof, but who dared to underestimate the Duke of Huainan's crown prince? Therefore, the so-called crown prince from Bailiang, even if Yangchun city was full of rumors about His Royal Highness of Bailiang's tyrannical behavior, even if he really stood in front of them, no one would think in this direction. He was really too outstanding. Su Fengnian curled his lips and quietly returned the embroidered winter to its scabbard. He somewhat missed the time when he was domineering in Bailiang. On his left was Qingsong, on his right was the Yellow Emperor, and behind him was the evil servant. Although it was not presentable, it was really satisfying to think about it. At that time, he did not practice the saber, so he did not have a fancy posture. But every time after the dust settled, he rolled up his sleeves and performed a set of deadly 18 kicks or something. The group of foppish girls was probably a little afraid of the 2 sabers at their waists, so they did not puff themselves up at their own cost. One by one, they dispersed and gathered in the distance. They whispered to each other, convinced that this foreign crown prince was an abominable person who did not know what etiquette was. Su Fengnian did not bother to make a fuss. Otherwise, the king of Jing An's crown prince Zhao Sun, who had been tormented like a drowning dog, would complain. There was no reason to put him on the same level as these ant-like descendants of the servants. Su Fengnian jumped into the pool, bypassed the poor scholar, and reached out to help the little beggar up. He felt her chest. His Royal Highness had suffered several hardships, and a long illness had turned into a doctor. He used Wudang's big yellow palace to slowly remove the clotted blood for the little girl. The little beggar did not dare to move and stood timidly. Fortunately, her face was no longer pale. Su Fengnian saw that the little girl was very nervous and did not dare to look at him directly. He did not know how to comfort her. He only said to the poor scholar, "It's all right." The poor scholar felt relieved. He hesitated and did not say thank you. Princess Jing'an saw His Royal Highness roll up his sleeves and pick up a handful of more than 20 copper coins from the pilgrim's wishes. He handed them to the little beggar. She did not take them. She looked at the scholar with a panicked expression. Seeing Brother Zhang nod, she stretched out her hands, which were yellow from years of frostbite. Su Fengnian said, "Let's continue to listen to Wang Ba's argument. Bring her along." Then His Royal Highness picked up the 2 halves of the watermelon. When they reached the shore, he did not say anything and handed them to Princess Jing'an. "You take them." Princess Pei's face was ashen. Half of the watermelon in each hand, what a scandal. But in the end, she did not have the courage to disobey this bastard who killed without blinking an eye. In the end, not everyone in the world had the qualifications to challenge King of Jing'an, Zhao Heng. It was even rarer to find someone who could make a powerful vassal return empty-handed after meticulous planning. The poor scholar helped the little beggar hide the copper coins and then held her hand as they walked into Baogua Temple. This kind of behavior was against the rules, but if he did not do so, who knew if those fancy pants would vent their anger on the child next to them? He would just treat it as asking for a medium-sized protective talisman for her. He could only hope that those children of Yangchun City would be a little smarter. The poor scholar stepped over the threshold of the great temple and saw Su Dianxia in front of him. His brocade robe was soaked through. He smiled, somewhat incredulous. Su Fengnian seemed to have guessed his thoughts. He did not turn his head as he led the way. "Don't think that I'm a good person. Those people bully this child, and I bully them. We're all the same." When the poor scholar heard this extremely mocking remark, he could not help but laugh. Princess Pei, who had a stomach full of endless grievances, deeply agreed. Chapter 251. The Baogua Temple was full of people. Excluding the 100 or so scholars who could participate in the Tsushui debate, there were about 300 to 400 spectators. The pavilions were all crowded with people. Su Fengnian went straight ahead and chose a relatively empty corner. He knocked on 2 relatively insignificant scholars with his embroidered winter scabbard, hinting them to move aside and let him sit on the mat. The scholars who could sit here were not simple. The debate of kings and tyrants was at the critical moment when they were suddenly interrupted. The 2 Gangnam-do scholars were about to reprimand him when they saw this barbarian coming out of nowhere with his scabbard and making a throat-slitting gesture. They were so scared that they had no choice but to sit on the mat with the scholars nearby. After Su Fengnian sat down, he beckoned the poor scholar to sit with him. The latter did not stand on ceremony. After sitting down, he looked absent-minded, as if he had mixed feelings. Su Fengnian looked up and saw a middle-aged scholar with a long beard standing and speaking generously at a place far away. He was tall and slender, with 3 strands of beard floating in the air. He could be called a bearded man. Almost every sentence he spoke drew cheers from the audience. His cadence was very infectious. Every time he paused, there was a gap for the audience to clap. Obviously, he was an experienced scholar. Su Fengnian was not interested in the debate of kings and tyrants, nor was he good at it. Naturally, he did not feel anything when he heard it. On the contrary, the poor scholar sitting cross-legged closed his eyes and murmured to himself, "Righteousness, profit, kings and tyrants, the sages of the previous dynasty did not have a deep understanding of it. This dynasty unified the country." First, the 2 chancellors of Shangyin Academy distinguished the natural order and human desires. Later, the Yao, Lu, and Zhu families each had their own opinions. Only then did the truth come to light, so we scholars did not fall into the clouds and mist. Yuan Honghu considered himself a refined scholar who respected the king and the despicable tyrant. He criticized the use of both righteousness and profit. He believed that this kind of attitude would only destroy the foundation of Confucianism. In the end, he abandoned the way of the king and respected the way of the tyrant, and then fell into the way of the legalism. Su Fengnian was a layman, but he could still get the gist of it. He turned around and asked, "Is this person trying to reason with the heavens and think that Wang Ba is different?" The poor scholar opened his eyes and nodded. He sighed and said, "Yuan Honghu has always insisted that the prosperous era of the ancient times was the prosperous era of the king. The current prosperous era of the dynasty is just the decline of the tyrannical era. He believes that the people of the world are too ambitious. This trend cannot be allowed to grow, or else a great disaster will befall." Su Fengnian smiled and said, "Aren't you afraid that Beijing will be angered by your words?" The poor scholar shook his head and said, "I don't know if what I said is right or wrong. It is indeed from the bottom of my heart. Let's not talk about whether the imperial court will mind. How can a scholar keep quiet because of this? Although I believe that where one succeeds, there is virtue, and where things come to their aid, there is justice. But I also admire Yuan Honghu's knowledge and foresight. Although he abhors unrestrained selfish interests, he does not blindly reject the benefits of helping the people. But as he said, even if we retreat again and again and admit that Wang Ba is inseparable, 500 years later, there might not be a single Confucian scholar left. Walking the path of profit, there will only be utilitarians left." Because of this, Yuan Honghu was once nearly drunk to death in the Litao pavilion, calling out that we should cry 500 years later. I can't stand those empty talkers with loose hair and bare chests, but I deeply sympathize with Yuan Honghu's drunkenness and crying. Su Fengnian said disapprovingly, "Only you scholars worry about the country and the people. But how many of you have been moral saints all your life? Have you ever really touched a copper coin? Do you know how much a steamed bun costs?" The poor scholar smiled and said, "The great scholar Yuan Honghu may not know, but I do." This time it was Su Fengnian's turn to be speechless. The two of them were so engrossed in their conversation that they did not notice that the water was flowing and the wine was already in front of them. The beautiful maid who followed the wine leisurely came over and picked up the white jade wine cup. In an instant, this corner became the target of public criticism. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, this old man, who had participated in countless talks but had not been able to raise his cup more than a few times, widened his eyes. The two Confucians who were chased away by His Royal Highness with a saber were full of jealousy. They wished they could bend down and snatch the wine cup. It should be known that today's debate between Wang Ba and Yuan Jiangyan and Yin Daolin, two of the most famous scholars, were among them. It could be said that it was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to express one's own philosophy in front of these two big talkers. Other than the two great scholars of the present age, there was also Qing Jia, a great scholar of Neo-Confucianism who was on par with Yao Baifeng. This old man was a great scholar of Neo-Confucianism who had exchanged letters with Master Yao. When did the contents of their letters not spread throughout the world? Qingzi said that he was slow and stupid all his life, and only made a hole in literary theory. He used this to mock Master Yao's carefree interpretation of the scriptures. Who in the world would not laugh at this? Although Master Yao's reply was to add that there was no need to delete a single word, there was no need for future generations to interpret the scriptures. It was also very mysterious. However, Gangnam-do was obviously more supportive of Qingzi's words. They insisted that even if Master Yao's knowledge was higher, Qingzi's morality was higher. Today, the debate between Wang Ba and Wang Ba had gathered the three contemporary saints of Confucianism and Buddhism. Yangchun City had attracted more than a few hundred scholars who had come because of its reputation. However, Qingzi had always been learning from books and did not like to interact with people. Many of the local scholars had not even seen him for decades. Even if they walked right in front of him, they would not recognize him. A beautiful maid came in with wine. Su Fengnian, who was originally bored to death, opened his eyes wide. He was an expert in cursing and swearing. His Royal Highness had traveled for 3 years and learned a lot of unique skills in cursing without using any obscenities. Unfortunately, he was a complete layman when it came to reasoning with people. Therefore, he did not stand up and used his scabbard to nudge the poor scholar beside him. Su Fengnian saw that the poor scholar was not afraid of the stage. He stood up freely and took the wine cup and drank it all in one gulp. After exchanging the wine cup with the beautiful and delicate maid, he said loudly, "If one can manage the world, righteousness will be beneficial. If one can help the people, Tao will be meritorious. Therefore, Ba Ba is the king." There was an uproar in Baogua Temple. Most of them were cold and mocking words like, "This person is trying to attract attention," or "This person is just talking nonsense." Their anger was surging. In the distance, Jiang's was number 1 Yuan Jiangyan and motionless monk Yin Daolin, who were sitting at the same table, looked at each other and smiled. Obviously, they were not moved and only felt that there was one more meritorious child. But the next sentence, "After 25 years of bumpy journey, I began to understand the scholars of today's world. Those who think they are sincere are all apathetic people who don't know pain," made the two famous scholars who looked down on him stunned. This person really did not stop until his words shocked people to death. A hunchbacked old man who did not participate in the debate had been shaking his head. Only when he heard this sentence did he laugh to himself. What the arrogant scholar said next was even more preposterous. The spearhead was directed at Jiang's was number 1 famous scholar, Yuan Honggu. "If you don't care about benefits at all, what's the use of crying for 500 years? Now that the people are not full, who should they cry to?" The beautiful bearded man, Yuan Jiangyan, laughed instead of being angry. He did not seem to be pretending to be magnanimous. He really laughed. But his table was far from the crowd and he could not see the subtle changes of Jiang's was number 1. Baogua Temple's host, Yin Daolin, said softly, "A strange theory is a strange theory, but it is also interesting. Let's see if he has the ability to prove it." Yuan Jiangyan nodded his head. The result was unexpected. The poor scholar from a poor family, whom almost no one in Baogua Temple knew, talked about Wang Ba for an hour. He was very meticulous, which was completely different from the practice of ordinary scholars who cherished their words as if they were gold. Generally, when talking about profound mysteries, since it was profound, of course it had to be extremely profound. The goal was to make people confused. That was true ability. If they understood, it would be a blow to the head. If they did not understand, who would care about them? If a profound talk was strict and logical, wouldn't it be very boring? If the words did not convey the meaning and were thousands of miles away from the topic, then it would be interesting. A white horse that is not a horse is not a realm, a white horse that is a deer is a realm. There were more than 100 famous scholars in the banquet and a few hundred listeners. Those who had strong willpower were still listening to this guy who did not know the big picture. Those who had strong willpower began to talk about things that could lift their spirits with the people around them. Those who had weak willpower were already itching to curse and yawn. If it was winter, they would definitely be stirring up lice. This was not impoliteness, but the elegance of a famous scholar. Su Fengnian narrowed his eyes. He folded 2 knives on his knees and raised his head with his hand supporting his cheeks. He was flirting with the delicate and pretty servant girl who was stunned by the poor scholar's endless chatter. He laughed and said, "Sister, tip me a cup of wine." The pitiful and cute servant girl was carrying a pot of wine and 3 cups. Her arms were already numb. Being teased by this lecher, she puffed up her cheeks and glared at him. Su Fengnian was not discouraged. "Sister, are you tired? Sit down and rest for a while. Do you want me to help you carry it?" She glared again when no one was paying attention. This young master looked quite upright. How could he be so unrestrained? Su Fengnian smiled brightly and asked relentlessly, "Where is sister from? Where do you live? How old are you?" Princess Consort Jing, and wished she could dig a hole and bury His Highness the heir apparent so that he wouldn't embarrass himself in public. Fortunately, no one paid attention to this young master who was flirting with the servant girl because Yuan Jiangyan, who had not debated with anyone in public for 10 years, spoke out for the first time. Yuan Honghu's talent and learning were the best on the left side of the river. If one traced back a little, one could see that the scholar's concept of using both the king and the tyrant came from the same root as Mr. Ji Shang of the Shangyin Academy. In those days, This Mr. Ji Shang only needed to win 2 out of 3 debates to become the Grand Chancellor of the Academy. However, he first won the debate of name and reality, then lost the debate of heaven and man. The last debate should have been the debate of the king and the tyrant, but Mr. Ji Shang unexpectedly gave up. However, everyone knew that this Mr. De advocated using both the king and the tyrant. Yuan Jiangyan asked in a low voice, Beiliang Xiao Shui is only dabbling in Zen, but you clearly talk about utilitarianism. Those who study Zen will search for the top, but they will not be able to find their way. They will leave and turn back. If you talk about utilitarianism, the scholar will learn and see immediate results. If you are lucky and forget about righteousness for the sake of profit, how will the future generation live? We scholars and common people laugh for a while, but the younger generation will cry for 100 or 1,000 years. Is this what you call a tyrant? There was an even bigger uproar. Yuan Honghu's words clearly implicated the eminent monk Yin Daolin, who was close at hand. It could be seen that this number 1 scholar of Jiangzhou really attached importance to the scholar who everyone thought spoke without thinking. Everyone's spirit was shaken and they began to sit upright and still. Su Fengnian was shamelessly flirting with the beautiful servant girl who was carrying the wine when he caught a glimpse of elder sister Su Jihu, who was in a yellow glazed roof pavilion, making a threatening gesture of knocking a chestnut. He rolled his eyes and was about to say a few more words to the servant girl when he caught a glimpse of a middle-aged Confucian who was staggering toward the pavilion. The old god of swords blocked the steps of the pavilion, his sword intent bursting out. Even when facing the Su of Gojoseon, Wu Luding, he had never shown this kind of attitude as if he was facing a great enemy. His Royal Highness suddenly stood up. His figure flashed again and again. He shuttled through the crowd like a fish. Su Fengnian approached the pavilion and saw that when the green-robed Confucian was 20 steps away from the pavilion, he waved his sleeves, as if he was trying to brush away the dust to show his great respect. Then, he suddenly knelt down. The Confucian cried mournfully. He gritted his teeth and said each word. His voice wasn't loud, but it exploded in Su Fengnian's ears. West Chu's criminal Chao Changqing greets Your Highness the Princess. Chapter 252. Su Fengnian felt his scalp go numb. What was bound to come was bound to come. However, there were countless survivors of West Chu. Why did they have to encounter this man in green robes? When he was 9 years old, he was summoned into the inner court. The Emperor of West Chu suddenly came up with such a grand proposition as testing the school's life and death. Not to mention a young child, perhaps even an old man in his 60s would not be able to use chess to describe life and death. Chao Changqing responded with, the rules of the board are righteous, the chess circle is lively and intelligent, the movement is like a talent in chess, the stillness is like a complacent chess death. The emperor bestowed upon him the title of Chao family's little complacency, and made an exception for his family to be promoted to the rank of nobility. Because his family was located in Lonely County, in the future Chao Changqing was given another name, Chao Lonely. When he was 12 years old, he played 3 games against the state preceptor Li Mi. In the first 2 games, he was defeated early on, but in the last game, he fought fiercely until he reached 200 moves. The more he fought, the braver he became. Huang Sanjia said that he was Li Mi's mortal enemy, the imperial preceptor of West Chu, who was known as a heaven-sent genius who could dominate the chess world for 30 years. In his youth, Chao Changqing was still unable to penetrate Zhama, so he waited for orders from the imperial preceptor Li Mi. His talent and learning topped the imperial preceptor. In his youth, this dragon carp of the West Chu, who found it difficult to use a bow and arrow and was not good at riding a horse, began to lead the Ministry of Internal Affairs. However, it was difficult for him to escape the stereotype of an internal court official. After the death of imperial preceptor Li Mi, his favorite disciple, Chao Changqing, returned to being a nobody. Before the age of 30, he hid himself in layers upon layers of the imperial preceptor Li Mi, unknown to the public. Chao Changqing immersed himself in chess for 20 years and won the 3rd title in his life, Chao Tuxiu, from the saying that the tallest tree in the forest. This showed how great Chao Changqing's talent was. He entered the capital when he was a child and only went to the southern border when he was 32 years old to command an army. He resisted the barbarians and had a constant strategy. Every battle, he would always win against the many with his inferior numbers, and earned the title of Chao Chongqing. Unfortunately, after the Battle of the Western Fortress, West Chu's power was gone. The great edifice was about to collapse. Chao Chongqing alone could not hold up the fort. Everyone only knew that he fled to Jianghai. It was unknown how Chao Chongqing, who was known to be unfamiliar with bows and horses and swords, suddenly became a great master of martial arts who could fight against 1,000,000 people. He won the title of Chao Guanzi in chess and defeated Chao Qingyi in martial arts. In the past 20 years, he steadily ranked in the top 3 in the martial arts evaluation twice. His limelight was unparalleled. In the first 10 years, no less than 20 important officials of Liang were assassinated by Chao Qingyi. Every time, he would come alone and leave with their heads. In the last 10 years, he entered Tai and city 3 times. Of those, he killed his way into the imperial palace twice. He faced 2 emperors in succession and killed hundreds of soldiers. The most recent time, he was only 50 steps away from the current emperor. If it was not for the protection of Han Diaoxi, the most honorable head in the world would have been taken by Chao Qingyi in the midst of thousands of soldiers. It was rumored that Chao Qingyi once laughed at the emperor and said, "If the emperor is angry, he can make the spring and autumn 9 kingdoms fall into millions of corpses. So what if I am angry?" As long as there was still Qingyi in the world, even if you obtained the world, you would not be able to live in peace. What kind of spirit did a martial artist have? Following the fall of West Chu, the names of Chao Dai, Chao Longli, and the others were no longer well known. Only Chao Guanzi and Chao Qingyi remained. The former was Chao Chongqing, who was invincible in both the Wulin and Yilin. The latter was the only mad scholar in the world who regarded the head of the Liang emperor as something in his bag. Any one of them could make people endlessly fascinated. And this old minister of West Chu, who was rumored to only wear plain clothes and not be good at playing classical music, was now kneeling in front of the pavilion, kneeling in front of the fallen princess. Heaven, earth, king, parents, and teacher, his clan had long been destroyed along with the country. His benevolent teacher Li Mi had long passed away. Now, other than the heaven and earth, which had existed for eternity, who else was worthy of Chao Chongqing's kneeling? The answer was right in front of his eyes. Su Fengmian could not figure out how this Qingyi could see through Jiang Ni's identity at a glance. Was it that mysterious and obscure fate that revealed the secret of heaven? Or was it that the little mud man's appearance was too similar to the parents of the emperor and empress of West Chu? But these were not important. For His Royal Highness, the most important thing was to consider whether or not they could stop Chao Qingyi, who was widely recognized as a traitor. He and the halberd Ningame estimated that facing this famous top 3 grandmaster would be similar to facing the 11th ranked Wang Mingyin in the Marsh of Reeds. They could only stall for time. In the end, it would depend on whether or not the old god of swords, Li Chungang, could do his best. The problem was that the agreement between the old man wearing the sheepskin fur coat and Su Shao was only to guarantee that His Royal Highness would not die. From the perspective of the old god of swords, he could not wait for the little mud man to escape from the confinement of Bailiang Palace so that he could practice swordsmanship with him. How could he be willing to fight to the death with Chao Guanzi? In the pavilion, Su Jihu narrowed his limpid eyes. His expression was somewhat gloomy. Yangzhou's Yangchun city had gathered no less than 1,000 foreign scholars in Hutting County's Baogua Temple alone. Just in Baogua Temple, there were hundreds of famous scholars from Yangzhou's aristocratic families. This kind of meticulous planning undoubtedly came from those old masters. They were just waiting for his brother to provoke the Gangnam-do scholars again so that they could respond to his call. It was true that Lu Lighting, who had the support of a concubine in the palace, could not stir up any waves. However, if the Jiangnan scholar group's entire counterattack was echoed by the 30,000 students of the Imperial College, it would be like countless vats of saliva that could drown someone. If at this time it was revealed that Bailiang had secretly kept the West Chu princess, presumably no matter how much Su Shao ignored the ritual, he would have a headache. Su Jihu glanced at Jiang Ni, whose face was as white as snow. His brows relaxed and he stretched lazily. He was calm and unruffled in the midst of chaos. he quietly waited for the situation to change. This kind of dead end, he would leave it to Fengnian to break it. Was it not enough to carve out a winning hand over 10 years? Chapter 253. Although there were no outsiders around the pavilion, after Chao Changqing arrived, he still attracted some curious gazes from afar. Su Jihu quietly instructed Ningame to disperse some of the famous scholars from Yangzhou who were trying to get close. She sat close to Jiang and I. If that terrifying middle-aged man in green wanted to harm her brother, she could use the dead princess beside her as a hostage. Su Jihu still had some true affection for Jiang and I. What happened in the past was not all fake. Of course, there was also the intention of going against her sister, Su Weisheng. Su Weisheng bullied her badly, so Su Jihu deliberately doted on Jiang and I. The two women's personalities were really not like biological sisters. Jiang and I was not His Royal Highness. Since she was young, she had been living under someone else's roof in Bailiang Palace. No one taught her how to live. She could not learn the ways of the world to wear a mask and pretend to be polite. After being scolded by the servants and maids of the palace or secretly pinched until her skin turned purple, no one complained. She would only follow her feelings and bear a grudge against His Royal Highness, who was always cynical and always smiling in front of her. Looking at him, she hated him. Who else could she hate if not him? With regards to West Chu, the empire and dynasty whose territory was once larger than Liang, her memory had long been blurred. Many times, lying on the cold bed in the palace, it was already very difficult for her to remember the warm faces of her father and mother. Thinking about it made her want to cry. As for the lofty and magnificent palace of the imperial family, it was even more out of her reach. She also did not want to think about it. Every day when she woke up, she only needed to think about the trivial matters of tiredness. Where would there be a princess with frostbite on her hands? When Jiang and I heard the words of the green-robed scholar, it was as if she had heard a bolt from the blue. She was so frightened that she retreated a few steps. Immediately after, she saw the old god of swords blocking the stone steps. She was even more at a loss. She leaped over old Manly, whose back was as straight as an ancient pine tree, and then over the middle-aged scholar who was kneeling on the ground. She saw His Royal Highness and the perished princess whose palms were covered in sweat. She was muddle-headed and absent-minded. It should have been her heroic moment to raise her eyebrows and blow off steam. Instead, she was in such a dispirited state. It was really going to chill the hearts of the West Chu scholars. In these 20 years, other than a few groups of West Chu scholars who had collectively migrated to the north like Hongjia, the number of people who stayed in their homeland and refused to become officials and who died because of the heroic words written by the poet numbered more than tens of millions. How could she be worthy of these pillars of West Chu who had generously sacrificed themselves time and time again? Fortunately, she only needed to face Chao Changqing at the moment. Not only was this outstanding scholar not angry at the little princess's loss of self-control, when he lowered his head again and again, he sensed the heartfelt fear in Jiang and I, whose real name was Jiang Si. He did not feel disappointed, only indignation and self-blame that could not be clearly explained. Chao Changqing, whose scholarly elegance was more outstanding than any other celebrity in Gangnam-do, did not get up. He remained kneeling on the ground with his hands on the ground. Others could only see that his temples were already white, but this did not diminish the unparalleled elegance of the distinguished scholar Chao Changqing. Thinking of his bumpy life, it added even more to this West Chu's leading official's demeanor as a first-class scholar. There was a son of the Chao family who was the proudest. At the age of 32, he led an army out of the capital. In the end, he played chess with the emperor. The great eunuch, who had the power to overturn the palace, personally took off his boots for the chess piece. The imperial uncle of West Chu personally poured wine for the two of them. Chao Changqing slowly raised his head. With tears in his eyes, he looked at the princess who was just a lively little girl in his memory. He had once held her little hand. In the Wanchong Palace, he threw chess pieces into the chess pieces, arranged the troops, and gave pointers to the emperor. Chao Dai did not seek riches and honor, he only sought the smile of the beauty beside the emperor. When he was young and high-spirited, he walked with a zither and met her by chance in a corner of the garden. The sun was setting and she came slowly, humming a local accent. In the chessboard pavilion, she slowly rolled up her sleeves. She gently dropped the egret chess pieces one by one, landing heavily on his heart. Later, she became the empress. He and the emperor finally won on the chessboard. Seeing that the emperor was about to lose, she used the red cat in her arms to mess up the complicated chess game. The emperor scolded her, but she just smiled innocently, just like in the past. He could only lower his head and not look. Otherwise, with Chao Dai's talent, how difficult would it be to easily reverse the game? He took the opportunity to move his hand and collect all the pieces to see who had the most. What was the point of having the most pieces on the board? That day, Chao Changqing stood up and left the capital alone. He never thought that once he left, they would never meet again. Chao Changqing remembered her. Naturally, he remembered her daughter, the little girl who was as innocent and naive as her. He raised his head to look. She really looked like her. When he lowered his head again, Chao Changqing's cold voice sounded again. Who dares to stop me? Su Fengnian smiled bitterly. This big bodhisattva was really King unreasonable. His martial strength was as high as the 9-story tower. Even the one in the capital couldn't do anything about it, so it wasn't shameful for him to be sullen. He thought about it. He wasn't afraid of Wang Mingyin, who was the 11th master, but Wang Xianji, who was at the 4th level of the 1st rank, was an immortal. The next two were also recognized as great supernatural beings who were close to the level of earth immortals. The new god of sword Dong Tai and Chao Guanzi had a clear difference between their realms and the remaining 7 on the list. In other words, once they used their strength, Chao Guanzi couldn't be regarded as 1.5 or 2 Wang Mingyin. After all, this was not Beiliang's territory, where they could easily mobilize hundreds of armored cavalry and thousands of armored cavalry to encircle and suppress them. Moreover, even if there were thousands of armored soldiers surrounding them, Chao Guanzi, who was the only great grandmaster in the world, was determined to escape or to kill a few people before retreating. He wouldn't be exhausted like the sword sage of Shishu who had drawn a circle and died. This was the horror of a celestial state master. The old god of swords sneered, Chao Changqing, you can try. Chao Changqing's palms on the ground suddenly clenched into fists. Dust rose. Boom! 2 tornadoes appeared. Rings of strong qi, centered on Chao Changqing's indigo robe, rolled out. The fur on Li Chuangang's sheepskin coat suddenly curled up. Standing behind Chao Changqing, Su Fengnian was forced to take 3 steps back by the invisible qi. He clenched his teeth and pressed his hands on his saber. His feet made 2 pits on the ground before he could stop himself. Chao Changqing only stood up slightly and did not make any other movements. Su Fengnian, who had just entered the best state of martial arts, could not withstand the pressure and was forced to take a dozen more steps back. Li Chungang instantly reached the peak of sword intent. Chao Changqing looked at Jiang Enai and said softly, Princess, do you want these to live or die? As soon as he said this, Su Jihu flew into a rage and then his face turned pale. If Li Chungang was still the god of swords, who was the first person in Sword Dao, he might be able to stop Chao Guanzi today. But now in Jianghu, Qi Xuanzhen had already ascended to immortality. Except for Wang Xianji, who dared to say that they could defeat the middle-aged scholar in front of him? Who in the world could reach the top of Martial Emperor City? Only Chao Qingyi. Chapter 254. Below the pavilion. The old man in the pavilion had a green snake in his sleeve. Above and below the pavilion stood 2 generations of outstanding talents. In the pugilistic world, there would always be new waves. Even if one was a genius with extraordinary talent, they would at most be in the limelight for 10 to 20 years. 30 years was the limit. It was a little strange in the recent 100 years. There was Huang Longshe in Yilan, and Wang Xianji in Donghai Martial Emperor City in the pugilistic world. It was a true once-in-a-century occurrence. Compared to the so-called once-in-a-century occurrence in the world, they couldn't be compared. Apart from these 2 fellows who were both celestial and demonic, the general trend was that the latecomers would surpass. One of the 4 grandmasters of the previous generation, spear immortal Wang Xiu, lost to his disciple Chen Jibao. Wudong Mountain had a person who instantly obtained the heavenly Dao riding green ox. After the old god of swords, Li Chungang went into seclusion, there was only a short period of gloominess in swordsmanship. Very soon, Peach Blossom Branch Dong Tai emerged as the leader. There were also Dragon Tiger Mountains Qi Xianxia, Sword Tombs Wu Luding, and Tangxi Sword Immortal Lu Baijie. The older generation of pugilistic world people might have been subdued by the heroism of Li Chuangang's sword, but when they were old and dead, how many young people would remember the old god of swords' elegant demeanor of a sword immortal flying on a sword across the river? If they didn't hear that Li Chuangang's swordsmanship was eternal, they would feel that it was too conceited and absurd. At this moment, Chao Chongqing was facing off against the former leader of swordsmanship, the 2-sleeved green snake. With Chao Chongqing's noble spirit, he shouldn't have underestimated the older generation's god of swords. However, everyone understood the meaning behind his words. Even if Li Chungang trampled on the land's sword immortal realm, Chao Chongqing wouldn't be afraid of him today. Even His Royal Highness, who had experienced the power of the 2-sleeved green snake, was worried. He was afraid that old man Li, who was old and missing an arm, would not be able to compete with Chao Guanzi, who was at the peak of his cultivation. Chao Guanzi's life had been full of ups and downs. The Confucian school had always been good at cultivating righteousness. After the fall of his country, he fought against the wrath of the emperor as an ordinary man. His hands did not touch weapons, his body did not wear armor, and he entered and exited the palace 3 times in a row. His mind and breadth of mind were undoubtedly much more tenacious and broad than ordinary martial artists. Chao Guanzi's invincibility was without a doubt. After Wang Xianji became invincible in the world, he built a city in the Eastern Sea and built the army tower. There were 6 floors below the top floor, and 6 martial slaves were stationed there to deal with challengers from all over the world. Generally, the peerless masters would rest for a few days after defeating one person. They would wait until their spirit was at its peak before fighting again. Even the insufferably arrogant Dong Tai, who defeated his opponent with a snap of his fingers, still retreated from the army tower after winning. After fighting for half a day, 3 days later, the 6 defeated people reached the top floor. Only Chao Chongqing fought for 2 days consecutively and reached the top. It was said that when he faced Wang Xianji, he was still calm and composed. He was praised for his vast qi, and only lost to Qi Xianzhu. How could Su Fengnian not be afraid that the old god of swords would go into a dead end? This old man cherished his reputation the most. If he really angered him, he would deliberately fight to the death with Chao Chongqing. Would he be exhausted to death? The poor scholar, who was brought by His Royal Highness to Baogua Temple, had a fierce battle with the beautiful bearded Duke Yuan Jiangyan, and unexpectedly he did not fall into a disadvantageous position at all. The righteous benefit Wang Ba was full of miscellaneous theories. It was as if he was trying to turn the world upside down. There was nothing he could not understand. The 300 to 400 spectators completely stopped looking down on him. They no longer dared to regard this young man as a scholar from humble family who was trying to sensationalize people. Especially when he talked about filial piety, loyalty, and talent, he talked about these 2 functions separately and then combined them together. In the end, different paths led to the same destination. He woke up a lot of scholars who considered themselves to be mellow scholars. The poor scholar's sentence, ability is vast, time is sufficient, you can be a sage, ability without time, empty talk, you can only be a pedantic scholar, was an extreme slap on Yuan Jiangyan's face. But Yuan Honggu was not angry at all, he dismissed it with a laugh. The scholar spared no effort in praising the view that the monarch was capable and meritorious, so he was magnanimous and did not make a fuss about it. Otherwise, based on Yuan Jiangyan's status, one word was enough to decide life and death. Although in all fairness, this debate was still won by Yuan Jiangyan, he personally judged that this debate was neither a win nor a loss. The host of Baogua Temple, Yin Daolin, nodded his head in agreement. As a result, naturally no one dared to raise any objections. If a commoner from a commoner family wanted to stand out among their peers, participating in a debate where celebrities gathered together was a shortcut. However, it was easier said than done. For a commoner from a commoner family to enter the banquet was as difficult as ascending to the heavens. Being able to enter the eyes of a celebrity was even more difficult, let alone winning a debate against Yuan Zhangyan, this kind of first-rate celebrity who was worthy of his name. As a result, no one doubted that this scholar sitting at the end of the banquet was already an overnight success, with riches and honor to be expected. Perhaps the aristocratic families who relied on their noble status had not yet been moved and were ready to make a move. Some of the second- and third-rate gentry families and high-class commoners were already considering whether or not they could make the first move to gain the upper hand. After the banquet was over, they could snatch this cheap son-in-law and take him into their family. After he was accepted into their family, he could participate in a few more debates and fight for his reputation. When the conditions were right, success would follow naturally. First, he would enter the rank of a nobleman, and then he would seek an official career. This was not inferior to a marriage alliance with a mediocre scholar with shallow learning. If his luck was good, this kid would be able to enter the eyes of Yuan Honggu, this kind of powerful family's direct descendant. Chapter 255. Su Jihu, who was idling in the pavilion, watched coldly from the side and laughed coldly. The reason why Yuan Honghu was so generous was because the scholar had borrowed her younger brother's influence. The scholar spoke with an authentic Gangnam-do accent and was clearly from a poor family in Yangzhou. Since the heir of Bailiang could lead him into the temple and sit at the banquet, the famous scholars of Yangzhou would not mind his lowly background and would personally make him famous. It was hard to say which of the two favors was more important. Su Jihu thought that for Yuan Zhangyan to be the leader of the Jiangzhou scholars group, her eyesight was not bad. Her ability to disgust people was quite good. Su Jihu, who was looking down from above, saw that the scholar did not show the slightest complacency after becoming famous. He stood up and looked around. There was a sense of desolation that did not match the situation. Su Jihu, who had experienced ups and downs in life, rarely misjudged men. His eyesight could be said to have reached the point of perfection. This was a bit strange. Scholars from poor families were like carps leaping over the dragon gate. There were those who cried tears of joy and those who went crazy. In his memory, this scholar named Shen Liangxi was acquainted with Su Huipu and was good at drawing dragons and tigers. Today he met her younger brother by chance. Su Huipu's temperament was cold and arrogant, but in the end, she was a caged bird in a noble family. She was undisciplined in small matters, but without exception, she had no choice in big matters. Just like herself, when did she ever want to marry far away in Jiangnan? The beautiful maidservant, who had been teased by His Highness the Crown Prince over and over again, stared blankly at the scholar beside her. She was fascinated. Just now, the way he scolded the 8 extremes was peerless. Even when he was competing with Yuan Honghu, a famous scholar who was second to none, he still did not have stage fright. Moreover, she had participated in countless conversations, so she was quite knowledgeable. The servant girls who could participate in the banquet were not simple. First, they had to come from a noble family. Second, they had to be beautiful, refined, and talented. For example, she was a servant girl who had been fortunate enough to enter the Yuan family since childhood. She was naturally intelligent and was taught poetry, literature, zither, and chess. Today, the servant girls who served wine were all wonderful people taught by the Yuan family. When she saw Chen Liangxi stand up, she hurriedly handed him a wine cup. The latter smiled warmly, took the cup, and drained it in one gulp to quench his thirst. In her heart, she couldn't help but compare the handsome man in front of her with that debauchee. That scoundrel and frivolous young master was so handsome for nothing. What a waste of his skin. The poor scholar, Chen Liangxi, did not see that, Su Dianxia. He felt somewhat regretful and wanted to express his heartfelt thanks. Since he couldn't find her, he didn't worry too much. He turned around and saw the little girl with a sallow face and felt pity for her. He asked the maidservant for some fruits and desserts and pulled the little beggar to sit down again. After the beautiful maidservant brought the lunch box, the little beggar didn't dare to eat, so he picked up the exquisite desserts and gave them to the child. The little beggar lowered her head and ate nervously, not knowing whether she remembered the taste or not. From time to time, he smiled and helped the little girl wipe the crumbs from the corner of her mouth. When the beautiful maidservant saw this scene, she was destined to be unable to imagine such a warm and affectionate scene in the past. Her heart softened. This young master was truly a good person. Outside the pavilion, Su Fengnian could only promise that he wouldn't retreat. It was already difficult for him to take another step forward. Chao Changqing, who never brought weapons to fight, was arrogant. Even if he was facing the former Jianghu legend, Li Chungang, he still went straight ahead, ignoring the old god of swords' rising majestic sword will. Before the old man with the sheepskin coat raised his arm, dozens of crisscrossing gullies appeared on the ground between them. Sword Chi rolling dragon wall. Li Chungang once fought with the West Shu sword sage in the palace. When Li Chuangang's sword Chi reached, the entire dragon wall, which had existed for hundreds of years, was shattered. Before that, Li Chungang said that West Shu had no swordsmen. He entered Shu alone and killed 16 swordsmen who blocked his way. At that time, it was undoubtedly the peak of Li Chuangang's swordsmanship. He was almost invincible. Numerous ravines cracked apart, and it was a ghastly sight. Only when it reached Chao Zhangqing's body did it seem to be imperceptibly obstructed, and it was forcefully stopped. Chao Changqing said calmly, "Senior, you are not only eighth. People only know that sword god Li's 2 sleeves are unrivaled, but they don't know the power of the sword Qi to open the gate of heaven." The more the middle-aged Confucian walked, the thicker the gullies became. The two were only 10 steps apart. The old man with the sheepskin coat had a leisurely expression, allowing Chao Guanzi to walk forward again and again. He only squinted his eyes and smiled, "Stop talking nonsense." Chao Changqing smiled gently. In the pavilion, Jiang and I, who finally had the courage to stare at Chao Changqing, asked doubtfully, "Uncle Qizhao?" Chao Zhangqing abruptly stopped and nodded heavily, all sorts of feelings welling up in his heart. Jiang Ni's eyes suddenly turned red. He wanted to get up, but he subconsciously looked at His Royal Highness. Seeing that he was expressionless, he turned his head and looked carefully at Su Jihu. Chao Changqing saw this scene and felt extremely sad. Without the old god of swords sword Qi, the ground in front of the pavilion caved in. Jiang and I saw Su Jihu smile and puckered his lips. He then got up and said timidly, "Uncle Qizhao, can you not do it?" Layers of dust and dirt flew outwards like ripples. Chao Guanzi, who was in the middle, said softly, "Chao Zhangqing will listen to princess's orders." Even Su Jihu could not help but be dumbfounded. It really was the conclusion that Chen Liangxi of the Tsushui Wangba had made. Unreasonable. The old god of swords snorted and finally retracted his sword Qi. Chao Changqing walked up the steps, but did not enter the pavilion. He knelt down again. This time, he knelt for the prosperous West Chu of the past. Su Fengnian looked at the standing clay figurine and the kneeling Chao Guanzi with a complicated expression. Were they leaving? Chapter 256. Why was it that even though they were both the top experts in Jianghu, the difference between them was so great? The old man Li Chungang liked to pick his ears and buckle his feet when he had nothing to do. Chao Changqing, on the other hand, fit the image of a peerless expert in Jianghu. His body was tall and slender, and his divine aura was restrained. Even when he knelt down, it was soul-stirring. Even though he was an old man with white hair, if one looked carefully, he still had the mellow taste of old wine. It was believed that those middle-aged women with rich experience would be subdued by Chao Changqing's scholarly demeanor. Su Fengnian stood at the bottom of the steps and quietly watched. Counting with his fingers, he had already seen 3 of the top 10 experts. However, the farmer Wang Mingyin had already been killed by a hand blade. Who could have predicted such an ending? Su Fengnian saw Jiang and I foolishly looking at Chao Guanzi, as if he didn't know what to do. He wanted to say something but didn't. He found it funny. This idiot, how could he think of taking advantage of the situation? If it was someone else who was slightly smarter and had the support of a great bodhisattva like Chao Guanzi, wouldn't he become arrogant? Who cares if he was a Bailiang or His Royal Highness? He would be pinched half to death by the world's number 3 Chao Changqing with 2 fingers. At the very least, he would be beaten into a pig's head to vent his anger. Su Fengnian smiled and shook his head towards Su Jihu, who was standing behind Jiang and I. He quietly signaled her not to make any moves. In front of Chao Changqing, it was best not to add feet to a snake. Even if the old god of swords was willing to use all his strength to stop him, it would be easy for Chao Changqing to injure anyone. In the world, the only person who could make this green-clothed official bow his head was the stupid girl that he had bullied for many years. His Royal Highness was unconvinced and sullen. In the 100 years of Jianghu, there were millions of martial artists. How many Chao Changqing were there? For some reason, Jiang and I saw the corner of Su Fengnian's mouth curl up and instinctively glared at him. Her glare was just a small habitual action without any lethality. However, today was different from the past. With Chao Guanzi present, even though his back was facing his Royal Highness, Su Fengnian immediately felt a strong murderous intent. Chao Changqing slowly turned his head and said, "Your Highness, Chao Changqing." "As long as you nod, Chao Changqing." "As long as I can do it, I will not refuse." "As long as I can." Even the two emperors of the Liang dynasty could not sleep well because of this old minister. Was there anything that Chao Changqing could not do? Generally speaking, Jiang and I was only a small vase that Su Rintu had brought back to the Bailiang Palace. It did not have any real meaning. In the 8 kingdoms of the spring and autumn period, there were hundreds of imperial sons and grandsons, empresses and concubines. If they fell into the hands of the king of Yen and king of Guangling, the beautiful women would at most be reduced to concubines and maids. The mediocre women would mostly be used as prostitutes for officials. As for the princes, there was no lack of them being killed by 10 of them at once. They would become the theme of the celebration banquet. Keeping these former nobles alive, if it was said that they harbored a disloyal heart and conspired against the emperor, they would be laughed at. Since that was the case, it was fine to give away a princess of West Chu. Moreover, they could befriend one of the top 3 in the world, Chao Guanzi. Why not? The old god of swords, who had been revealed by Chao Changqing that he had other skills besides the 2-sleeved green snake, paid no attention to this matter. The old man followed the agreement. As long as he could ensure that his Royal Highness did not die, then he wanted the little mud man to learn swordsmanship from him. As for other nonsensical matters, he did not worry about them. Moreover, Li Chungang, who had lived for more than 80 years, knew very well that as long as the little mud man stayed by his Royal Highness' side, there was an 80 to 90% chance that he would learn swordsmanship. It was better to sever this ill-fated relationship earlier. Where in the world could he not go? The old god of swords glanced at his Royal Highness with schadenfreude. He wanted to see how this kid would respond. After the reeds, he was probably afraid that the elusive assassin would take his head. He gritted his teeth and carried the 2-sleeved green snake every now and then. This kind of perseverance and ruthlessness was not at all like his Royal Highness, who was destined to be the king of Bailiang. Su Fengnian smiled mischievously and said, "No, she's mine." Jiang and I said angrily, "Who's yours?" Chao Zhangqing was as calm as a dried-up well. Perhaps he was rejoicing that this time, he had traveled far and wide only to find what he was looking for without any effort. His mood was not affected by the crown prince's arrogant words. He smiled and said, "It's fine. After a while, your highness will change your mind." Su Fengnian still had a sloppy attitude. He smiled and said, "I can't guarantee anything else, but this matter is really non-negotiable." Chao Changqing glanced at his Royal Highness and said with a playful smile, "Your Royal Highness, don't hold the blades with both hands. Wipe your sweat. Otherwise, the sword-drawing technique you learned from Dongyue's imperial family will be greatly reduced." The thick-skinned Su Fengnian laughed. As expected, he released his hands from the spring thunder-embroidered winter blades and wiped them on his sleeves. Su Jihu, who sat down in the pavilion again, smiled and the haze in her heart dissipated a little. She did not know Chao Changqing, but Chao Guanzi had vaguely heard about him from some wanderers and officials. Naturally, she did not know that the green-robed Confucian who could make Li Chuangang's sword chi roll off the dragon wall was that famous master. However, Su Jihu had sharp eyes and dared to ignore the old god of swords and the power of Bailiang. How could she relax? She was worried about her brother's safety. She looked at Jiang and I. Femme fatale, it was true. The pity she had for this fallen princess was swept away the moment Chao Zhangqing appeared. Cold temperament? Su Jihu, who was most willing to tarnish her reputation, would never deny it. Chao Guanzi did not speak, Su Fengnian did not speak, and Jiang and I did not speak. For a moment, the atmosphere in the pavilion was heavy. It was Su Jihu who came out to smooth things over. She smiled and asked, Jiang and I, do you want to drink tea together? Chapter 257. Jiang and I nodded. Chao Zhangqing frowned, but he didn't say anything. He seemed to have made up his mind to follow the etiquette of an official in front of Jiang and I, not daring to step out of line. The group returned to the tea room. Su Hui was inside. After some polite greetings, she skillfully brewed tea. Her technique was experienced and pleasing to the eye. A woman from a noble family could see elegance in the details. She obviously noticed the unfamiliar scholar kneeling beside her. A man from a noble family, especially after 40 years of age, not to mention appearance, most of them had a spiritual qi support. Whether it was righteous qi or yin qi, it was very different from the common people. This was the so-called foundation. Su Hui could not help but take a few more glances and felt more unfathomable. Jiang and I called Uncle Qi Zhao and handed him a cup of tea. Chao Changqing bowed his head and took it silently. Fortunately, he did not call her princess again. Su Jihu asked thoughtlessly, Jiang and I, why did you call him Uncle Qi Zhao? Jiang and I said softly, Uncle Qi Zhao is a great national player. I often watch him play chess. Chao Changqing shook his head and said, this sinner cannot be called a national player. Then he added, this sinner will one day cut off Huang Longshi's head as a sacrifice to the late emperor. Su Huipeng was startled. Huang Longshi, this was not a mortal person. The unjust war of the spring and autumn period was all because of him. That game of chess had never been played before and would never be played again. Cut off Huang Sanjia's head? The late emperor? Su Hui, who was shocked, did not change her expression. She quickly thought about who the middle-aged scholar was. Su Fengnian did not want to be followed by Su Hui on this topic. Chen Liangxi's sudden appearance had already made him vigilant. Gong Namdu advocated talking, but those old foxes were more cunning than the other. God knows if this great scholar who became famous in one battle was a carefully planned hidden chess piece. Moreover, taking the risk to recruit Chen Liangxi was the opposite of the original intention of this trip. Bailiang's heir had just turned 20 and Su Xiao had just asked for the hereditary title in the capital. But he was already impatient to train people. What were his intentions? Su Fengnian changed the topic and asked with a smile, Sister Su, where did young Master Chen go? Su Huipu hesitated almost imperceptibly for a moment before saying gently, in the meditation room, Mr. Swan and the others were having a deep discussion about the righteousness and benefits of the Wang Ba. Perhaps they were having a confrontation earlier and had yet to enjoy themselves to the fullest. They had to decide the winner and loser. Su Fengnian drank tea as if it were wine. He did not understand the slightest bit of elegance. He shamelessly asked for another cup of wild tea from Su Jihu. He laughed and said, young Master Chen speaks eloquently, but it's a pity that this heir apparent does not quite understand. Fortunately, Yuan Honghu and the other scholars are knowledgeable, otherwise it would have been buried. Su Huipeng furrowed her eyebrows. She was no longer young, but her temperament was good and she had a unique charm. She patiently said, Your Highness, although Child Chen is as talkative as the famous scholars, he does have the ability to save the world. He can't be regarded as an ordinary metaphysical person. Su Fengnian said absent-mindedly, if that's the case, then I'll ask Big Sister to inform the Lu Mansion. If Lu Xianlang doesn't care about his talent, let Mr. Tang Shi promote him. Su Huipeng's face immediately darkened when she mentioned Tang Shi soared St. Lu Baijia. She did not speak anymore. The corner of Su Jihu's mouth curled up. Chao Changqing said calmly, this person is an extreme outsider. Using both the Wang Ba and the Wang Ba is just a cover. If he can establish his own school in the future, his teachings will definitely be more harmful than Yao Baifeng's school of mind. Yao Baifeng's school of Confucianism is just a little biased. Even if the Yao family's school of mind becomes popular, scholars will still be scholars and Confucians will still be Confucians. However, once this person's teachings become popular, it will be an internal injury to Confucianism. The root of the disaster will be in the belly and the disease will be incurable. If they want to set things right, it will not be as simple as cutting off a few tails of flesh. If he is not a saint on the inside, how can he be an external king? At the root, his teachings are clearly the same as Huang Longshi's. If this person's reputation is not prominent, then so be it. However, if he shows signs of establishing his own school, then I will definitely kill him. Su Hupong's face turned pale. The old god of swords sneered, "You scholars are the most vicious. Especially scholars, when it comes to killing scholars, you are more willing than anyone else. This bad habit of scholars belittling each other is even more incurable than the jealousy of women. This old man is sick of it. Chao Zhangqing, this old man will say it here today. In the future, if you want that young man, just let me know and this old man will fight with you." Chao Zhangqing indifferently declined to comment. Su Huipeng firmly remembered the name Chao Changqing. Like Su Jihu, she did not know that Chao Changqing was the Chao Guanzi who assassinated the emperor. Otherwise, they would not dare to live in the same room. If the capital found out, it would be a disaster. This thorn had been in the hearts of the two emperors for 20 years. Before the previous emperor died, he truly said that if he did not kill Chao Guanzi, he would not be able to rest in peace. For this reason, there was a group of imperial bodyguards who were hidden in Jianghu. Each one of them was extremely skilled in martial arts. They were also assisted by a considerable number of elite soldiers who spied for information all year round in order to kill Chao Guanzi. It was rumored that after the emperor ascended the throne, he did not summon these men of sacrifice. They were all under the direct charge of the cat Han Diaosi. It must be known that this was the great eunuch with the strongest yin qi in the world. He was a freak who could kill celestial phenomena. Han Diaosi had white eyebrows and a white face. To put it nicely, he had white hair and a youthful face. To put it bluntly, he had turned into a demon. How many sensational and bloody scenes in the palace were not all caused by this cat? People all said that he had the ability to retain his youthful appearance because he liked to use human hearts and human liver as food. He sliced them into pieces to go with wine. Not to mention whether it was true or false, just hearing it gave off a bone-piercing chill. When the tea was hot, it would cool down. The group left Baogua Temple and returned home. Chao Changqing stood at the door and watched Zhang and I get on the carriage with his own eyes. Su Fengnian boarded the carriage and asked, "Mr. Chao, are you going to reveal her identity to the whole world? If I don't let her go, will you follow me and let everyone know that I have a Chao Guanzi by my side?" Chao Changqing smiled and said, "His Royal Highness is a smart person. The king of Bailiang is like father, like son." Su Fengnian was silent. Chao Changqing didn't look at His Royal Highness. He only looked at the carriage where Zhang and I was and said with a smile, "Your Highness is still weighing the pros and cons. This decisiveness has lost to Su Shao. Even your emperor can't kill me, how can you kill me?" Chao Changqing sensed Su Fengnian's aura. He shook his head and said, "At least you can't now. Unfortunately, I found the princess now." With these words, could it be determined that Chao Guanzi didn't dare to underestimate His Royal Highness' good fortune? Could Su Fengnian be worthy of this attention? Chao Changqing stretched out his palm and made a repetitive action. He said, "Your Highness, as long as you are willing to go with the flow, Chao Changqing can kill Chen Jibao for you. Su Shao is not easy to kill, you are not easy to kill, but it is the same for me." Su Fengnian smiled bitterly. A man in blue killing a man in white? Chapter 258. Su Fengnian entered the carriage. There was still only Su Jihu and Princess Jing, and inside. Su Fengnian sat cross-legged, leaning against the wall of the carriage, his brows tightly furrowed. Su Jihu was somewhat distressed. He reached out and smoothed his younger brother's brows. Su Fengnian smiled somewhat bitterly. Was the delicate situation in Beiliang already so clear that even Chao Changqing could see through it with a glance? How many emperors, especially the founding emperors of previous dynasties, didn't borrow a knife to kill people and then withdraw the knife and stab the companions by their side who were originally in charge of the knife? Dogs were raised to bite people to guard against thieves. If the thieves were gone, how could the dogs be kept to waste rations? But Beiliang was not a dynasty after all. It was divided into territories and occupied a remote corner of the country. No matter what, Su Shao was called the second emperor. Nominally, he still had to be respectful and reverent to the one in the capital. Allowing him to slaughter people and carry a knife to the palace was a vast and mighty act of heaven. It was to let the restless Beimang know that the imperial court would not be so foolish as to destroy their own 1,000-year foundation. While Su Shao was ambitious and ruthless, he was not the kind of cold-hearted person who would cook the hound after the cunning rabbit had been caught. He would also not treat the old generals of Beiliang with indifference. On the contrary, Su Fengnian knew better than anyone that Su Shao had spent most of his time and energy appeasing and taking care of his former subordinates and descendants. The imperial court seemed to be enjoying this and did not tire of it. The pressure they exerted on him was just right. They did not force him, a prince with a different surname, to rebel, but they also did not let Su Shao be truly comfortable. Yan Jieshi, who had betrayed Beiliang, was a typical example. Intentionally or unintentionally, the white-clothed Confucian had monopolized Qin Jibao's power and had his own team. Even if it was not as exaggerated as having as many generals as clouds and scholars as rain, it was not too far off. Moreover, the saying that one Qin Jibao could fight half of West Chu was said by the late emperor himself in front of Su Shao and all the civil and military officials in the Baohe Palace before his death. Qin Jibao was widely acknowledged to be the best at national wars. His ability to mobilize more than 100,000 troops was superb. It was said that he remembered the names of every captain, as well as their strengths and weaknesses in leading the troops. Opportunities were fleeting, but Qin Jibao was always able to make the finishing touch in the deployment of troops. The Battle of the Western Fortress lasted 3 days and nights. Qin Jibao did not sleep or rest. Behind him, the commanding soldiers who held the flag were rotated in 6 batches of 18 people. The military historian who was in charge of recording the entire process wrote no less than 10 lines of paper. From beginning to end, Qin Jibao, dressed in white, did not move an inch. Under his countless precise orders, the last several 100,000 youths of West Chu were exhausted and killed. It was rumored that when the emperor read the record, he read it over and over again. The highlights were circled countless times, and at the end of the scroll, he wrote 8 words, truly fascinating, worthy of being called the war immortal. In these 2 years, Su Fengnian had no choice but to imagine that if Qin Jibao, whose reputation and prestige at that time was comparable to the other war immortal in white, had agreed to the emperor's request and rushed to Nanjiang, would Beiliang have been simpler? All these years, Su Shao had never mentioned anything about his adopted son, Qin Jibao. Although Su Fengnian was His Royal Highness, he did not know Su Zhao's true inner thoughts. If one were to say that Su Shao had kept Qin Jibao as a whetstone, it was even less likely that he would slaughter all of the meritorious veterans to pave the way for his successor. After Qin Jibao, the white-clothed war immortal, became so powerful that it was impossible to get rid of him. Was he really not afraid that Su Fengnian would lose to Qin Jibao? Would he, who had spent decades in the military, lose everything in the end? As long as Qin Jibao treated him coldly in Beiliang, how could Su Fengnian truly not care about anything else? Su Jihu calmly looked at his younger brother, who was deep in thought. Belatedly, he was shocked. That Chao Changqing's surname is Chao, and he can make the old god of swords so nervous. Could he be Chao Guanzi? Su Fengnian, who had come back to his senses, said helplessly, "Unfortunately, you were right. This person is the great officer who went to the imperial palace to play hide-and-seek with the Han cats when he was bored. Princess Jing and was not stupid. Jiang Ni's surname was Jiang. She was a servant girl, but when she interacted with His Royal Highness, when did she have the slightest awareness of being a servant?" Pei Nanwei laughed coldly. It's one thing to secretly hide the fallen princess, but the old officials of West Chu came knocking on your door. How will your highness explain this to the capital? If the Jiangnan scholars find out about this, they will exaggerate it and provoke the emperor's anger. Won't your highness come aggressively in high spirits and leave dejectedly with a face full of dust? Su Fengnian's mood had already hit rock bottom. He said unhappily, "It's not your turn to be secretly happy. If I'm at peace, your life will be more comfortable. If I'm not at peace, how good can you be? With your tolerance, to be able to become the princess consort of Jing and Palace, Zhao Heng must be blind with his discerning eyes. On top of that, there's Zhao Sun, who covets your body. This family is unfortunate. I saved you from the abyss of suffering. It's fine if you're not grateful, but you dare to take joy in my misfortune? Have you forgotten the taste of being slapped in the face with the embroidered winter scabbard?" Pei Nanwei only laughed coldly. Xiao Chongqing and Zhang Ni's true identities will be revealed. This matter is indeed troublesome. Su Jihu said with a headache. The old swordsman in the tea room mentioned Chao Guanzi's name. Based on Su Hupang's cautious nature, she will definitely say it to the old consecrators. Su Fengnian thought about it and smiled. Troublesome is troublesome, but it's not a big deal. Although those shrewd old bastards in the Jiangnan scholar group aren't good people and like to fish in troubled waters, they may not be willing to shed all pretense of cordiality with our Bailiang. What's the benefit of having a death grudge with Su Shao? Boorish men use their blades, scholars use their mouths, and the well water doesn't interfere with the river water. Unless it's absolutely necessary, there won't be a desperate fight between pen and knife. That's fine, I've killed a few low-level scholars. Now that Chao Guanzi has come out to stir things up, I'll just treat it as giving the old family head something to use against me. This way, their hearts will be balanced and they won't feel like they've lost face. If nothing unexpected happens, before I leave Yangchun, someone will come to remind me. It'll be nothing more than, "Your Highness, it's wrong of you to kill someone. We've caught your tail this time in Yangzhou, but it's fine, we'll let bygones be bygones and turn a blind eye to it. Therefore, Your Highness, shouldn't you restrain yourself a little and stop making a ruckus? It's not good for everyone." That kind of boring tone, Su Jihu listened to his younger brother imitating the old pedant's tone and nodded vigorously. He couldn't help but hold his belly and laugh. Princess Jing'an couldn't believe it and muttered, "State affairs are such a trifling matter?" Su Fengnian sneered and said, "Trifling matter? How is this a trifling matter? Do you really think that aristocratic families are favored by the imperial court? That they have to wag their tails and beg for mercy from the emperor? State affairs are state affairs, how can they be compared to family affairs? If that's really the case, then wouldn't all those princesses who couldn't marry into the aristocratic families and princes who couldn't marry into the aristocratic families for hundreds of years have suffered humiliation in vain?" Su Fengnian knocked his head against the wall of the carriage and flicked the embroidered winter on his knee with his finger. He narrowed his eyes and smiled. It's only been 20 years. A centipede dies but doesn't fall down. It's hard to say what will happen in the future. It has to be said that Su Shao is really fierce. 10 aristocratic families with intertwined roots that don't recognize the emperor and only recognize the family. He chopped melons and vegetables like cutting vegetables. Those emperors who died at Su Zhao's hands might have 1 or 2 clever people who died with a smile. How could our emperor tolerate so many potholes from the 4 clans of Yangzhou appearing in the courtyard of a flat expanse of land? Bestowing the title of king and holding the fort in all directions was for the sake of cutting flesh with a blunt knife and slowly cleaning up these stubborn skin diseases. There were pros and cons to this action, but taking 10,000 steps back, if these powerful vassals wanted the position of emperor, regardless of victory or defeat, wouldn't they still be surnamed Zhao? Wouldn't the world still belong to the Zhao family? In fact, in the Spring and Autumn War, the ones who lost the most were Princess Pei's arrogant families. The current scholars are clamoring and cursing fiercely, but Su Shao wasn't afraid because he had calculated the emperor's thoughts. "I dare to kill people in Yangzhou for the same reason. Princess Pei, why don't we make a bet? Right now, the scholars of Jiangnan are working with the students of the Imperial College to accuse me of ignoring the laws of the country and committing crimes. Let's bet on who will be beaten down by the emperor with a plank.